This story is more of an urbex experience. However, it did happen during a sleepover. It took place in Alton, which is a small countryside town in England. The town doesn't really have much to offer for young people growing up there, and for that reason, it encouraged many rebellious kids like myself to find mischievous things to do in our spare time, often without our parents' knowledge. I'm not an easily scared individual, but this experience shook me up for a whole month. I remember it as clear as glass. It was a Friday. My friend, who I will call Jack, asked me in math class if I wanted to do a sleepover at his place for the weekend. I was hesitant at first because I wasn't really a fan of sleepovers, but then he persuaded me by mentioning that there was this abandoned hospital to explore in the woods. I jumped at the idea because I was really into all things scary and had heard about this same abandoned hospital in a Mr. Nightmare video. The thought had crossed my mind to go explore it since I lived in the same town, and this would present the perfect opportunity. Of course, I said yes, and then Jack told me to be at his place at noon on Saturday. I got home after a tiring day and did some further research about this abandoned hospital online. It was called the Robertson House. After scrolling for a few seconds, I came across more YouTube videos of creators exploring the hospital, which I was surprised to see. One of the videos began giving an explanation of how this place was used to treat British soldiers who had returned from the South African Boer War. It was then reopened in 1908 and was used as a treatment center for children who suffered from tuberculosis, but for whatever reason it got shut down and was sold off in 2001. Since then, there have been stories circling the internet of paranormal activity happening within the building, from the voices of children being heard down the hallways to loud taps and bangs on the walls. I was always skeptical of the paranormal, so I didn't read too much into it. The next day, I made it to Jack's house in the afternoon, and we quickly ate dinner, barely able to contain our excitement. When we left, we told Jack's mom that we were only going to the town center and wouldn't be gone for more than a couple of hours. His mother nodded, and we set off toward the hospital. After 20 minutes, we got to the forest that supposedly led up to the hospital's estate. It was a quiet, isolated area. As the twigs snapped beneath our feet, we both picked up on just how silent it suddenly became out here. Despite being with a friend, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that had hit my stomach since entering these woods. I was hoping that at any second I would hear the sound of birds, or leaves rustling, or the wind blowing through the trees. But that wish never came true. It was like all life ceased to exist in this area. I was almost regretting my decision to come here. However, I carried on, staying on high alert until we finally came across the towering bricks that I had seen in the YouTube videos. Tall grass and weeds covered the bottom half of the building, and every window was boarded up with graffiti splashed all over them. Except for one that stood out. It was like being in a scene in the show, The Haunting of Hill House. Jack strolled ahead of me because he could see that I was losing my confidence. He told me, "The entrance is this way," and pointed toward the one window that hadn't been boarded up. Jack climbed inside first, being careful not to cut himself, and then I followed. We both stood by the window preparing our phone flashlights before slowly stepping into the dark hallway. I noticed more graffiti littering the walls, as well as spider eggs hanging from the doorways, which Jack pointed out to me and jokingly said, "You do not want to crack one of these open." I was too fearful to laugh in the moment. We both noticed that there was a door in the hallway that was halfway open. I pointed my flashlight to the aperture, and that's when Jack dared me to walk in there without my phone, to which I strongly declined. I said to him that if anyone was going to go in there alone, it would be him. He agreed to do it, but not without calling me a massive coward for refusing. I watched nervously as he approached the door, pushed it open, and then turned his phone light off. I then saw his figure slowly disappear into the room, and then an eerie silence followed. I waited outside clutching my phone, thinking about calling it a night when suddenly I heard Jack yell. I heard genuine fear in his voice, so I knew he wasn't joking around. I swiftly rushed in and saw Jack in the middle of the room, looking down at his feet with his back to me. I asked him what was wrong, and when he turned to look at me, I could see a look of pure fear in his eyes. He signaled to me what he was staring at, and when I saw myself, my blood ran cold. Inches away from Jack's feet was a pile of bird carcasses stacked on top of each other. Some were old and decomposed, while others looked fresh. We heard what sounded like hooves crashing down above our heads. Jack and I looked at each other, confirming to me that we were both hearing the same thing, and booked it toward the exit. As I walked past the staircase, Jack yelled out, "Hey, I still want to see what's upstairs." "Have you lost your mind? I know you heard those footsteps too. There could be a squatter roaming around up there." He ignored me, and without hesitation, he shouted from the bottom of the staircase, "Hey, is anyone up there? We mean you no harm." An uncomfortable vibe followed. He then took his first step. The stairs creaked loudly as he did. My anxiety was stirring with each step he took. Even though I wanted nothing more than to get the hell out of there, I didn't want him to go alone. I approached the bottom step, but as I got there, Jack said, "Don't. You're not going up there alone. The stairs will collapse if you take another step. Just stay here." Fine. This is a really stupid idea. I'm gonna wait for you outside." He nodded to me, then disappeared out of sight. And then I made my way to the window that we entered through and carefully hoisted myself out of the building. I waited for a good minute, wondering if I had made the right choice to leave Jack in there. Suddenly, I heard the sound of sprinting, getting louder and louder, coming from inside the building. That's when I saw Jack through the window, running toward me. He then jumped out, faster than a cheetah. Before I could even ask any questions, he told me to run and to not stop. I followed after him, running faster than I ever had before, with adrenaline pumping through my veins. After what felt like a half an hour, we made it to the town's center and stopped to catch our breath. Once I regained my composure, I asked him what the hell happened in there. Jack told me that after he got to the top of the stairs, he saw a room directly in front of him and could see small glimmers of light at the bottom of the door. He then put two and two together and determined that this was the area where we had heard the footsteps coming from. He continued the story and said that when he opened the door, he pointed his phone's light into the room and saw a huge pentagram painted on the floor with candles surrounding it. When he backed out of the room and into the hallway, he then saw several robed figures standing at the end of the hallway, looking at him. That's when he decided that he had enough excitement for one night, and it was time to leave. We chose to not speak a word about this to anyone. To this day, this experience still sends chills down my spine. Who were those people in the hospital with us? Was it some kind of cult that lives out in those woods? Quite frankly, I don't need to know that badly. I stay far away from those woods now, and I advise anyone to never allow their curiosity to get the better of them in situations like this. There are some things that are better left in the forest. When I was around 10 years old, I had been invited for the first time to a sleepover at my friend's house. We'll call her Abby. She lives pretty far away from me, so whenever we hung out, it always felt like a special occasion. I had just started becoming brave enough to sleep at other people's houses, and since Abby was one of my oldest friends, this would be a trial run of sorts. Here's a little background about Abby's family. She is the youngest of four. Her oldest brother, who is about 10 years older than us, has pretty severe autism and continues to live full-time with Abby's parents. He was always a bit of a wild card, and as a 10-year-old girl, I always felt a little anxious around him. Anyways, there were 3 of us girls at the slumber party. We decided to sleep on the main floor of her house, so we could stay up late watching movies. I chose to sleep on a couch that was perpendicular to a wall of windows that overlooked the backyard. The other girls were sharing a mattress on the floor. We threw on a DVD, but we all eventually fell asleep during the movie. Sleeping away from home has never been easy for me. I wake up frequently, and sometimes can't even fall asleep to begin with. This night was one of those times. After about 2 hours, something stirred me back to consciousness. When I came to, I was bombarded by the bright glow of the TV. After my eyes adjusted, I noticed something outside that hadn't been there before. There was someone sitting in one of the deck chairs and had positioned it to face directly toward where the 3 of us were sleeping. He hadn't noticed that I was awake, but seeing him made my heart race. I stayed totally still, watching him. It was dark, but I could still tell that he was studying us and smirking. Terrified, I watched him for a few more minutes before turning myself into the couch cushion and closing my eyes. Some time passed, until I finally mustered up the courage to look again. He was gone. To this day, I have no idea who it was that had gotten into Abby's backyard and sat on her deck and watched us in the middle of the night, but the image of him sitting there, grinning, still haunts me. I thought it may have been her brother, but from what I could see, this man had dark hair and dark eyes. Abby's brother has blonde hair and blue eyes. They looked nothing alike. Luckily, we all made it to the next morning unharmed, but this was the last time I ever spent the night at Abby's house. I was 11 years old when this occurred. It was a weekend, and I was supposed to spend it at my friend's house. For 11-year-old me, this was very exciting. Having been slammed with schoolwork the entire week, I was to spend what I believed to be Friday night sleeping over, and the entirety of Saturday, and would return home that evening. What made it even better was the fact that her parents had an event they could not avoid, and trusted us to stay in their 2-story house for the 6 hours they would be gone for. Back then, the idea of spending the whole night alone with my friend was great. No interference, and a whole 6 hours of games and movies on their huge TV. But it turns out, my friend had other ideas. I arrived at her house just short of 8 p.m. It was already pretty dark out, and her parents had waited for me to arrive before telling us about the emergency contacts, dinner, and such. They also reminded us to make sure their 4-year-old Labrador was inside by a certain time, as it was supposed to rain later on, and his kennel had a few loose panels which leaked when it rained. After they left, we watched a few shows, had dinner, and were chilling in her living room playing cards. That's when Sid, my friend, had the ingenious idea of exploring a fenced-in plot of land that was just down the street. The area was overgrown with plants and weeds. We got the dog inside, grabbed the keys, and left the house to make the short 10-minute trip. It would have been around 10 p.m. by this point. In retrospect, this is where we still had a chance to avoid this particular encounter, but being the curious and daring 11-year-olds we were, we ventured out anyways. Rather uneventfully, we arrived and climbed over the fence. Luckily for us, the fencing was run down enough in certain places for us to make it through pretty easily. Once inside, Sid suggested that we sit a few meters away from each other for as long as we could, until one of us was too scared to continue. Remember, we were both 11. This was our idea of fun. We faced each other and walked backwards until there was just enough light to see the general silhouette of the other. After what seemed to be a good 10 minutes, I saw Sid rise up and start walking toward me. She seemed to be walking rather fast as well, jumping over rocks and debris at a daring pace, even getting cut by some thorns in the process. She came up to me, and just as I was about to laugh at her and call her out for being scared, she told me to get up because she had to go feed Shaggy, the Labrador. I remember being very confused because her parents had already filled his bowl with food before they left, but I saw the look on her face. I had never seen her this pale before. It looked like she had just seen a ghost. So without asking any questions, I said okay, and we made our way back over the fence, albeit in a very tense and quick manner. The moment my feet touched the ground, I felt Sid grab my arm, and we began sprinting down the street. To put things into perspective, I had a bruise where she grabbed me for the next 2 weeks. We ran like hell, arriving at her house and went through the metal gate in her front yard. She handed me the house key and told me to unlock the front door while she deadbolted the gate's various locks. It was at this point I was starting to panic. But we got into the house, where Sid then proceeded to run around, locking and closing all the windows and doors, as well as pulling the curtains shut. I was very confused as to why she was doing all this, and so was Shaggy, who just stood there watching her. After about 10 minutes, she came back into the living room. With a very intense expression, she explained to me that the reason that she had done all this was because while we were sitting apart back at the lot, she happened to glance a few meters to my right and saw a figure crouching behind some bushes. She thought she was imagining it at first, until it crept closer to where I was sitting. They seemed to be unaware that she was watching them. She didn't want to startle me or let the person know that she had seen them, so she made up the story about having to feed her dog so we could get out of there without alerting the figure who was still crouching there. After hearing this, I was quite shaken, and we hugged for a few minutes, deciding not to tell our parents, as they had very much warned us not to go out, and we didn't want this to be the last sleepover we had together. So we thought it was best to keep this to ourselves. We peeked out of the window into the streets, which seemed to be empty as far as we could see. We put this event behind us and decided to continue having a fun sleepover. I would love to say that this is where things ended, but what happens next has stuck with me to this day, and I still get scared just thinking about it. To give you an idea of the layout of her house, a concrete wall surrounded the home. It had one entrance in the front where the metal gate was. The house itself had 3 potential entry points. The obvious 2 are the front and back door. The third was an exterior basement entrance. Those of you who live up north will know what I'm talking about. It looks like a cellar on the side of the house. It had a metal door with an inside lock. So an hour or so after the incident, we were upstairs in Sid's bedroom playing games on her computer when we heard the dog barking downstairs. Shaggy was growling at something. Keep in mind that her dog was mostly friendly. He rarely ever growled or barked aggressively. Sid went to go check on him. When she returned a short time later, she informed me that the dog was standing near the front door, growling. We were very confused. This was unusual for him to do. We thought maybe a stray dog or cat might have wandered onto the front porch or something, so we decided to go to the balcony that was attached to her room, which overlooked the front yard and out into the street. Instead of seeing what we assumed to be a stray animal, we looked down to see someone standing in the front lawn. In the very limited light we had, we could make out heavy layers of clothing and a head full of hair that looked very matted. Shaggy had joined us on the balcony and was wanting to be let outside. We crouched, and just as we were about to discuss what we should do, we heard what sounded like the front door rattling, as if someone was trying to open it. We crept back downstairs, only to realize that the person was now at one of the windows next to the door and was trying to open it. The realization hit that they were trying to find a way inside by going around the perimeter. Just as we were about to retreat back upstairs, my friend grabbed me again, and in a hushed tone, she told me that she had forgotten to lock the basement door. We both looked at each other. If the intruder managed to get inside the basement, there would only be a flimsy lock on the inner basement door, separating us from him. At this point, we heard more windows being shook behind the house. We were lucky that he had chosen the opposite side of the house from where the exterior basement door was located, but he would eventually reach it. Sid told me to wait in the hallway with Shaggy while she went outside to lock the exterior basement door. She informed me that if she was caught, I was to let the dog loose. We were both terrified, and since we didn't have time to think about it, I stood guard while she left through the front door and ran around to the other side of the house. I could still hear the windows being shaken as the intruder was still looking for an opening. I then heard Sid fumbling with a lock before finally managing to turn the deadbolt. She then quickly ran back inside. Trust me, those few seconds were nerve-wracking. We then shut the front door and locked it, and just as we did, we heard the exterior door rattle harshly. If she had not gone out to lock it when she did, the intruder would have found his way inside. While he tried opening all the other windows, we made our way back upstairs to the balcony. When we looked down, we saw him once again, standing in the front lawn. However, this time, we could see his head was tilted back. It appeared that he was looking right at us. However, we knew that it was too dark for him to be able to spot us. We had turned off all the lights in the bedroom beforehand. He then started laughing. He then got down on all fours and crawled around the front lawn of the house, all the while still laughing like a lunatic. In retrospect, this was a very disturbing individual. We should have absolutely called the police, but being the terrified 11-year-olds we were, we still didn't want to get into trouble. We had led this crazy person back here by breaking the rules. He continued crawling around for nearly half an hour. He then stood up, then made his way over to Shaggy's kennel in the corner. He used it to hoist himself over the wall and jumped down on the other side. We were still standing on the balcony, waiting and listening to see if he would return. But fortunately, we had seen the last of him that night. At around 2 a.m, her parents finally returned. The next day, they were very confused as to why all the doors and windows were closed and why there was mud on the front doorknob. We told them that we were playing hide and seek and we wanted the house to be as dark as possible. We should have told them the truth. Although we were scared, we didn't understand just how dangerous this situation was. God only knows what that man would have done to us if he had managed to get inside.
Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was heading to a friend's house off campus that evening, just after sundown. She texted me directions, but something must have been off because the further I drove, the worse the streets started to look around me. The shops turned to boarded up windows, the graffiti got thicker, and every person on the sidewalk seemed to be watching my car instead of minding their own business. And that's when I realized that I'd wandered into the war zone off Central. I just needed a place to turn around. I spotted this old apartment complex with flickering floodlights and pulled in, easing through the lot while a few kids darted between cars chasing a deflated soccer ball. I was rolling pretty slow, trying not to hit anybody, when this guy came out of nowhere like he'd almost been waiting for me. He was a walking stereotype. Shaved head, locks, Ben Davis shirt, long dicky shorts, white tube socks pulled high, threw up a hand and shouted, "Yo, stop." I hit the brakes, heart pounding already. I had my phone in one hand ready to fake call. My other hand was resting near the gear shifter just in case I needed a bolt. But I couldn't just floor it, not with those kids running around in the parking lot. Jogging up to my window, grinning wide but not friendly. "Yo, roll down the window, man." Against all of my good judgment, I cracked it. "What's up?" I asked. "You got any coke?" he asked me. I blinked. Only if it's Mexican coke," I said, trying to sound casual. praying he'd laugh and just move on. He did, in a sudden outburst that showed his gold teeth. "Shit, man, can I get a lift down to the store for some smokes? You mind?" Every instinct inside me told me no, but something about his tone, half joking, half daring me, made me hesitate. Maybe I didn't want to offend him, maybe I was scared. Either way, I said, "Yeah, sure, hop in." He slid into the passenger seat, noticed the music right away. "Hey, that's a Tribe Called Quest." "Yeah," I said back. He slapped the dashboard. "Man, I've seen them 3 times back in Cali. Q-Tip, that dude's a legend." Did help a little bit. Talking about music humanized him, and for a minute I started to think maybe I was overreacting. The gas station was only a few blocks away, but the drive felt like it took forever. He kept shifting around in the seat beside me, scratching his leg, glancing in the side mirror like he was expecting somebody to be following us. He told me his name was Danny, but didn't offer a last name. Said he used to run with some boys out in LA and moved here just to chill, whatever that meant. We pulled up to the Circle K and he told me to keep the engine running. "I'll be quick, man. Don't trip." He went inside and I sat there sweating bullets, watching him through the glass doors. He was talking to the clerk and pointing at something, then pacing near the back. After a few minutes, he disappeared behind an aisle, and I began counting the seconds, debating on whether or not to leave. Then suddenly the doors slam open, and he comes sprinting out with 2 paper bags clutched directly to his chest. "Go! Go, man, go! They're calling the cops!" He yelled at me, diving into the passenger seat. I didn't really think about it, I just hit the gas. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I could hear sirens somewhere off in the distance, rapidly closing in. He was laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. "Yo, you should have seen your face." I shot him a look, white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "Did you just rob that place?" "Nah, man," he said between laughs. "I'm just messing with you. Relax, damn." I didn't know really whether to believe him, but we were already pulling back into the apartment lot. He told me to stop near that same corner that I picked him up at. "Hey," he said, suddenly calm, almost thankful. "I don't blame you for being nervous around me. You're actually a pretty good dude for stopping." He dug into one of the bags and handed me a pack of Funyuns and a glass bottle of Mexican Coke, then reached into his pocket, pulled out a small dime bag, and tossed it into my lap. "Oh, to thank you," he said, opening up the door. He gives me a nod, then walks off toward the shadows between 2 buildings. I sat there for a long moment, engine still idling, staring at that dime bag in my lap in complete disbelief. To this day, I'll fully admit that was some of the best weed I've ever smoked. Not the worst wrong turn I've taken either, but it was one that taught me just how thin that line is between danger and chance. You really never know who's walking up to your window until it's too late. My name is Rich, and my fiance's name is Joanne, who, for this story, I'm gonna call Joe, who also comes with me on nearly every long-distance trip that I take. We run a towing and automotive transport company out of New York State, specializing in exotic and luxury vehicles. It's not uncommon for us to haul a 6-figure car across the country, but on this particular trip, it's, well, one I'm never gonna forget. It was early May 2025. We had just delivered a Lamborghini down to northern Florida. That drive south was pretty smooth. No dot inspections, no traffic, nothing but open road. I remember thinking to myself, this might actually be a stress-free run for once. That changed, however, the moment that we tried to unload. There were lots of these little wrong turns that we'd made on this trip, and this was just the first one. My truck, brand new, top of the line, computer-controlled everything, suddenly threw an electrical fault mid-unload. The PTO light went out, the hydraulics cut off, and the whole system just died. Luckily, I'd gotten the Lambo off safely, but the truck was half dead. The builder back in South Carolina told me, "Bring it here and we'll get you first thing tomorrow morning." So we fueled up, grabbed a couple of energy drinks, and hit the road north. It was 9:45 p.m. when we pulled into a gas station just outside of Jacksonville. While I filled the tank, Joe ran inside for some snacks and drinks, which is an absolute must. That's when I noticed it, this black Chevy Impala, older model, maybe 2010 with tinted windows, parked across the lot, engine idling. When I fired up my truck, Their lights turned on too. Now in the moment, I brushed it off because who wouldn't? Coincidence, I figured. We get on I-95 and the night was dark. That kind of dark that eats headlights. Air was heavy, thick with the feeling of a storm brewing. Then, just as Joe mentioned rain, it comes down in sheets. She glanced back and said, "Hey, that car's really riding your bumper." I checked the mirrors. I couldn't see much. Then, whoever it was quickly swings over to the left lane and hit me with their high beams, just blinding me completely. What a dickhead, I thought to myself. It was annoying, sure, but I've seen plenty of impatient and incompetent drivers. I ignored it and kept on rolling. Hours pass and that storm never really lets up. By the time we hit Columbia, South Carolina, I'd forgotten all about that tailgater. That is, until that same black Impala comes flying up beside us. It swerves over into my lane, cutting me off so hard that I had to slam the brakes. Joe jolted away, cursing, and the Impala then slows down to about 55, then 40, then 35. It was deliberate, taunting almost. I dropped a gear and floored the accelerator, passed it, and finally got a good look. The tent was so dark that I couldn't see a single thing inside, or a person, and that's when it clicked. "That's the same car from Jacksonville," I said. Joe nodded. She had noticed it too. She booked us a hotel near the dealership, 15 minutes away, just off I-85, ETA of around 3:30 a.m. That last hour would really feel endless, and that Impala stayed behind us the whole time. When we pulled into the hotel parking lot at around 4 a.m., the rain was still hammering down. The lot was packed, but we squeezed into a space. Across the road, half hidden in the rain, sat that same Impala, idling on the shoulder. Joe looked over at me nervously. "Okay, do you think he's after the trailer or what he thinks is inside it?" I shrugged, though deep down my gut was screaming, yes. Before stepping out, I reached into my bag, unzipped the hidden compartment, and pulled out my Glock 19, sliding it in my waistband. Joe nodded silently. "On three," I said. We run for the door. We bolted through the downpour, slamming through the hotel's sliding doors, and were hit with the stench of mildew, cigarette smoke, and something worse, an undertone of urine. A front desk clerk waddles out from the back room. He smiled, but something about it was just off. "Checking in?" he asked, and his tone was a little too casual, too familiar, too friendly. I handed over my driver's license as well as my credit card. He pulled the reservation, making a key card and smiling still. "First floor for you two, right around the corner." He winked at Joe as he slid the key across the counter. "Breakfast is at 6:30. "Yeah, thanks," I muttered, hurrying it off. Joe was squeezing my arms and looked up at me. "What a creep." I nodded back in agreement. When we reached the room, the smell wasn't much better. The place was old, damp and stained, and Joe sat on top of the bed, still fully clothed. "I can't wait to leave here," she said quietly, as I walked out of the room's prison-style bathroom. "It's just one night, thankfully," I told her. We changed, closed the curtains, and tried to get some sleep. An hour later, I was half asleep when I heard the faint rattle of a doorknob. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but it kept going and got louder and more violent. It was the adjoining room door. Somebody was trying to get in. The realization shot me awake quicker than anything really has before. I reached over for my Glock and aimed it at the door. My main concern was Joe. I kept my focus, training my pistol at the door. Joe was still sleeping soundly beside me. For 30 minutes straight, that handle shook, and then it was just followed by silence. I exhaled slowly, and that's when something moved outside the window. I caught it in my peripheral vision. I froze. A tall, thin shadow stood on the other side of the curtain. Then, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I yanked the curtains open, and there he was, a man in black with a ski mask on, standing inches from the glass. I raised the gun at him. "Back off, or I'll shoot." He didn't move, just raised both hands, then pulled the mask up, just enough to reveal his mouth. He smiled at me. It was wide, too wide and full of teeth, and he slammed his fist on the glass, and Joe screamed, jolting awake. "There's somebody out there," I shouted at her. She ran over, but when she looked out, no one, just the rain. Then she saw a smudged handprint on the outside of the window, and that was enough. We packed everything and stormed down to the front desk. "Yeah, we're checking out," I said, throwing the key across the counter. The clerk didn't even blink.
Aw, already? Why not stay a little longer?
His grin spread was unnaturally wide. Maybe, love on each other a little bit. Yeah, no, I said, and we continued to walk out. I unholstered my gun and we sprinted to the truck, Joe locking herself in. As I loaded up our last bag, I noticed the trailer's stepladder was down. Somebody had tried to pry the side door open and parked just beyond us. And wouldn't you know it, the Impala. "Rich," Joe yelled at me, "let's go." As I climbed into the driver's seat, my headlights illuminated the figure standing beside the car. Same man, same mask. Staying in this hotel was our second wrong turn. "Drive," Joe said flatly. "Say less." I hit the gas, tearing out of that lot and back onto the highway. The clock on the dashboard read 6 a.m., and neither of us really spoke or said a word for miles. Finally, Joe whispered after a while, "The sunrise is beautiful." I glanced over her hand in mine and felt my shoulders drop. "Yeah," I said quietly, "it is." We made it to the dealership half an hour later or so, parked and slept in the truck until the shop opened. Now, I've seen a lot on the road. I've been followed, almost hit by wrong-way drivers, and seen unexplainable things in the mountains, but nothing has ever rattled me like that before. Not like that night. The thought of losing my soulmate to someone dangerous or being taken away from her, I can't handle that. One of the main reasons I carry is to protect us, our equipment, and the valuable cargo that we haul. When the sky turns dark and the stars and the moon are hidden by cloud and rains, if I glance out a window, I can still see that smile through the glass. I didn't want to be in New Jersey. That's the first thing that I'm going to tell you, because I wasn't supposed to be on this trip at all. I'm actually not sales. I don't pitch. I don't stand in front of boardrooms. I sit in a chair and pull numbers. That's what I do. Quiet work, Excel work. If I talk to anybody, it's through an email. But late on the night before, I got a call from my boss saying, "Listen, there's a small change of plans. They want to see you supporting financials. Legal wants you in the room." I told him, I wasn't scheduled for this. I don't even have a suit." "Buy one when you land," he said. "Look, it'll be easy. Fly out, be there for the meeting, back up the model if they push it. You're not even presenting, you're just kind of there." "Why can't they send the deck?" "They have the deck. They need a human too." And so that was what it was. I took a last-minute flight out and landed in Newark and followed the signs for car rentals because all the team cars were already in use, and nobody had the bandwidth to loop back and just pick me up. I grabbed the cheapest one available, this sedan that they had. It was a gray compact smelling like somebody had sprayed cologne over cigarettes. I didn't care. I just wanted to get to the hotel, send my wife a text that I was in fact alive, and run numbers in peace until the following morning. The meeting was at 9 the next day. I had the financial data on a thumb drive in my bag. That little drive was the reason I was there after all. If their guy in a room asked about cash flow projections or margins, I'd be able to say, "Here's the 5-year picture," and not sound like a complete idiot. That's all I had to do. Simple. Extra paycheck, just deliver it. No sightseeing, no dinner, no might as well check out the city. None of that. Hell, it's New Jersey. I was there to get in and get out. Just hotel, shower, cheap meal, sleep, meeting, done. But the thing about being somewhere you've never driven before, especially when it's already dark and the GPS on your phone begins to act a little glitchy, it doesn't matter how simple your plan is because now you're in it. I wasn't even 20 minutes out of the airport before I knew I was in trouble. I'd missed my turn leaving Newark, and that's all it took. One wrong exit and everything started to blur together. My phone map spun and lagged, the blue dots sliding around like it didn't know where I was. At one point, it said I was in the middle of the ocean. The signs flew past me, couldn't read any of them, and the traffic was brutal. Horns, brake lights, semis cutting each other off. Every time I thought I'd corrected the course, another lane would end, another detour would come up, another split would appear without warning. This road system was impossible. After 15 minutes or so of fighting it, I realized that I'd lost track of everything that felt familiar. The streetlights were spreading out, the traffic was drained, and the buildings grew older and closer together. The GPS finally recalculated, but the directional voice was silent, so I found myself funneled down this narrow ramp onto an unlit neighborhood. It's fine, cities are confusing. I'd turn around, make it right. But the first thing that I noticed was the people, dozens of them, all walking or standing around on corners. Even though it was really late at night, some looked half awake, wandering around. Others just watched the cars go by. My stomach was knotting up. The storefronts had bars in the windows. Half the streetlights were dead. I didn't even know the name of the town, but later on, I'd learned that it was Camden. I slowed down at a stop sign, checking the map again. That's when two men on the sidewalk turned their heads at the same time. Just a glance, but they kept watching. One raised his hand like he was pointing something out. I rolled forward, trying to not make eye contact. Every block that I drove, more people would appear. A man leaning against a parked car, a group by a corner store, someone crossing the street in slow motion like they wanted to force me to stop. I kept moving though, refusing to let the car idle. I felt like I was a tank in a full of sharks. Rerouting, my phone said again. I felt like throwing it out the window. It was useless. I ended up turning down the side street that looked a little wider, a place I could hopefully flip a U-turn in. The pavement changed from blacktop to cracked concrete, houses pressed in closely, windows dark. I passed one with police tape fluttering on the porch railing. I said out loud to nobody but myself that I shouldn't be here. Then I saw this light, a single red light stop ahead, the only one in view. I needed a break to check the map, so I pulled up to it and stopped. And that was a mistake. At first, I really thought the area around me was deserted. The cross street looked empty, and then from my left, I saw a group standing by the corner, 3, maybe 4 men total. They hadn't looked my way until the car stopped, and now they were all just staring directly at me. I tried to look calm, one hand on the wheel, eyes forward, and the light stayed red. Then the men started walking, not rushing, just kind of drifting closer, splitting up as they got toward me. One on my side, one on the passenger door, and the other toward the hood. I reached over and hit the lock button. The click sounded like a gunshot inside the car. And that was enough to set them all off. One of them grinned and called out to me. "Oh, you scared, man? We're just saying hi." The others laughed. I kept my hands visible on the wheel. I'm just lost," I said through the glass. "Trying to get back to the highway. That's all." The one in the front stepped closer until he was right at my bumper. Highway's that way," he said, pointing behind me. "Why'd you lock your door then?" The lights still didn't change, and I could hear my heart over the idling engine. Another one came up to the passenger window and peered in. "Yo, he's got a rental," he said. "Look, airport tag. This fool is an out-of-towner." That made the others laugh even harder. "Ooh, a tourist," one said. "You picked the wrong street, dummy." They circled the car tighter. My phone screen went black from the timeout, and for a brief moment, I couldn't even recall my unlocking pattern. "Hey," one said, tapping the glass with a ringed finger. "Roll it down, buddy." I shook my head. "Roll it down." I cracked it maybe an inch, my voice trembling. I just need directions." He smiled at that, big white teeth, dark eyes flat as oil. "Nah, you're already where you need to be." I noticed his hand, he was gripping something, a small length of pipe wrapped up in tape. Behind me, somebody slapped the trunk. "Yo, pop the trunk, let's see what he's got in here." I jumped in my seat. The one near the door laughed at me. "You shaking, man? You good? Ain't nobody gonna hurt you if you chill." I just want to leave," I said. "So go." "The light's red." They all cracked up at that. "The light's red," one repeated, mocking me. "Man, you better pray that thing changes before I get bored. People like you get killed out here." "The light's red, damn, homie." The one at the passenger side bent to see in the car, looking for my hands. "You on the phone?" "No." "You sure? Because I don't like surprises." He pounded the glass twice, hard enough to make it rattle. The one at the front spat on the hood. The sound of their voices were rising up now, layered, cruel, overlapping, like they couldn't really decide what they want to do. "Pop it open, step out of the car. Where you headed, boss? Bet he got cash on him." The lights still was red, and I stared at it until my eyes started to water. I didn't know what it was, but I was just frozen in fear or whatever. Fear of having to run somebody over, fear of damaging the rental, fear of overreacting. One of them slammed against the windshield with his palm, and I flinched back. Another hit the side mirror, flipping it inward. Somebody behind kicked a bumper. "Yo, you hearing me?" the first one shouted. "Look at me when I talk to you." I'm looking," I said. "I hear you." "Then quit being a bitch. Open the door." I shook my head at him. "Fine," he said, bringing up the pipe. "We'll open it for you then." Out of the corner of my eye, blue and red lights then washed across the buildings. A short burst of siren followed, just a chirp, and the men stopped in mid-motion. I felt like I'd been saved, like God reached himself down and set that patrol car right there for me. A cruiser sat halfway up the next block, angled toward us. Its spotlight snapped on, lighting up the whole intersection. The cop's voice then came through this loudspeaker.
"Gentlemen, hands visible. Let's not make this complicated. Move it along."
One by one, the men backed up, pretending it was nothing. We were just talking," one said, palms up, and within seconds they were drifting back off into the dark. The officer's voice came once more.
"Driver, proceed forward slowly."
My foot barely even found the gas. I rolled through the intersection, hands trembling so hard I could barely even steer my car. The light turned green behind me, finally, and it actually made me laugh because even the cop had told me to roll through the red light. My lack of survival skills were glaring for all to see. I didn't look back. I drove until the glow of the highway signs came up again, white and sterile up against the night sky. My hands were killing me from gripping that wheel so hard. I missed 2 chances to merge because I couldn't trust myself to look anywhere but straight ahead. When I finally reached the on-ramp, I pulled over on the shoulder and just sat there with the hazards blinking. The silence inside the car was so complete that I could hear my organs working. I checked my mirrors, empty. The blue and red flash from that cruiser was long gone now. I didn't even know if the other officer had followed them or just waited until I was moving. I didn't care. I just knew I'd been seconds away from something irreversible. The hotel was another 30 minutes down the interstate. I kept the GPS muted and followed the signs by instinct, white-knuckling it the whole way. When I finally parked, I just sat there for 10 minutes before I finally got the courage to get out. My reflection in the window didn't even look like me. Eyes wide, mouth dry, collar crooked. Once inside, the desk clerk just smiled at me, like nothing in the world was even wrong. "Hey sir, late night?" she asked me. All I could say was, "Yeah, you could say that." The meeting the following morning went fine. I answered what I had to, nodded when spoken to, and smiled when it was finally over. Nobody knew that I'd almost been dragged out of a car that night before. Nobody knew I spent the whole presentation hearing the slap of hands on glass and the sound of a pipe tapping up against my window. I flew home that evening. I looked down from the plane windows as the lights of New Jersey disappeared over cloud cover. And in that moment, I told myself one thing. Absolutely no more surprise visits to New Jersey, and absolutely no getting lost in Camden again.
I'll be the first to admit that this all could have taken place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life, you should not be afraid of ghosts. Fear the living, because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that time period, the cabin was not going to be rented out and would be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed to the cabin in my dad's car, which he left me in his will. Now this is our family cabin that my parents rented out when they weren't using it. I had the keys to the cabin, and also had the code for the alarms. So I didn't feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them on my stay. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and played PlayStation and listened to music during the evenings. I also did some drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much shut in, aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes. With my dog as company, and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room, a guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent in the living room, the kitchen, or the master bedroom. I had no reason to venture to the other rooms, and I always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name is Midnight, by the way, and he has also since passed. I then played some video games and watched some movies. That day was forecasted for pretty heavy snowfall, so I didn't feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car, and decided to stay in. This is where things begin to get a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were over a mile away. Surrounding us was a forest of very tall pine trees. This particular detail will be important later on. From the past couple of days, I knew that both of these cabins were empty. I think I've given enough background. Now I'm going to jump into the strangeness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked somewhat fresh, like someone had been here in the last 20 to 30 minutes. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me, and I may not have noticed. Perhaps they were shut-ins like me. Whatever. The footprints led away from the cabin and disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I didn't think much of it and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head off to bed. Midnight was lying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out. I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs and started to do his doggy dance, which was his way of telling me that he had to go pee. Shit. Well, fine. I couldn't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway so he could do his business. The only thing is, he didn't have to go. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull his leash, trying to drag me off somewhere. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the footprints had been earlier. He also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up to the roof. After he figured out that he was not going to go where he wanted to, he sat himself down and just stared into the dark, which was a bit unusual for him. Perhaps there was an animal somewhere out there in the forest he wanted to chase down, but fuck that. I didn't want to chance anything. So I pulled him back inside, and we both went back upstairs. Around 30 minutes later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. I tried to rationalize that it could have been a pine cone falling from a tree, or maybe a harmless critter from the forest was running around up there. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart, at a length too wide to be a small animal, or even a man. You notice things like that when you're in an isolated setting like this. It was really getting under my skin. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door expecting me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and my shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and went out to the balcony. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my flashlight. Nothing was there, and the snow on top looked undisturbed. Must have all just been in my head, right? But what about Midnight hearing the noise as well? Maybe he was feeding off my fear and paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. I turned off the flashlight and allowed my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I was just staring at the forest next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a bit taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position between two branches. He looked very tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, and was extremely thin. It was squatted on one branch, and its abnormally long, white arms were extended above its head, holding on to another branch above it. Its mouth was wide open, with no expression. What the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing or not, and I stood there just staring, motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and started pacing behind me, lightly barking at the same time. Still, the thing did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head told me that that was not a good idea. So I carefully backed up to inside the room, called Midnight back in, and shut the door. Once I locked up, I shined the light in the thing's direction, but nothing was there. I then closed the curtains and retreated back to bed. Later on in the night, I heard some light tapping at the screen door, like someone was strumming on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but wouldn't go anywhere near it. The strangest part was I had the feeling like something was inviting me to open the door. But at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice inside my head, telling me to stay where I was. I eventually passed out. When I woke up the next morning, it didn't take me long to pack everything up and get the hell out of there. In 1984, when I was 8 years old, my family moved to Allenstown, New Hampshire. Our house sat at the end of a dirt road near Bear Brook State Park. In front of our house was an open field that had small tree patches here and there. After what I estimate to be about 50 yards, the field ended and the forest began. One day, my friend and I wanted to go exploring further than we had before. We were very familiar with the first acre or two of forest we usually roamed around in, and wanted to cover some new ground that day. Shortly after passing the usual landmarks, we came upon a dirt ridge. Beyond that, we saw a clearing with a row of 4 cabins. The area included a shallow pond, a dense wall of trees on either side, patches of bushes between the cabins, and a few cars that looked like they had been torched. The cabins had that typical lined wood look with flat rooftops. When we first discovered this place, we thought it was an abandoned resort or something. However, when we peered through the windows, most of the cabins contained furniture and beds. There was no one in sight. I remember feeling creeped out as we moved from cabin to cabin, and I would soon discover why. Behind one of the cabins was a dirt bed with half-buried animal bones scattered across it. If these remains were from hunting, surely they wouldn't want vultures buzzing around their resort. I thought it was odd, but not too alarming. My mom always told me to stay away from dead animals because they could be carrying some kind of disease, so we didn't feel the need to go poking around the pet cemetery, and soon left. Curiosity got the better of us, and we returned a week later. During our second visit, I noted how odd it was that there were no signs or markers indicating who owned this property or if it was a private campsite. There were also no roads leading there. This time, it felt like we were being watched, though I didn't see anyone at first. As we prepared to leave, a tall man wearing a dark jacket emerged from the trees and ran toward us. He was about 100 meters away, with a rifle slung over his back. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he shouted. My friend and I started running away. The man followed us, unslinging his rifle and shouldering it as if he meant to fire at us. We climbed over the dirt ridge and ran without stopping until we got back to my house. We never told my parents or anyone else about the incident. We didn't want to be restricted on future explorations, but I don't remember ever going back there. What happened to us could be chalked up to a couple of kids trespassing on private property. But a year later, hunters found a 55-gallon metal drum in a wooded area close to where those cabins were. Inside were the bodies of a woman and a young girl. At the time, the victims were not identified, and the case remained unsolved. That was until 15 years later, when a second drum was discovered containing the bodies of 2 more girls, about 100 yards away from where the first one was found. One of the victims was only 11 months old. DNA testing later linked the victims to a serial killer named Terry Rasmussen. I never got a good look at the man who chased us away from the cabins that day, so I can't say for sure if it was him or not. But when I think back to that place, I think about how some people say that they never found all of Terry's victims, and I always remember those bones we saw scattered about. I honestly don't think 8-year-old me could tell the difference between animal and human bones. I heard a story on your channel about the 1977 Oklahoma Girl Scout murders, and it brought to the surface a story from my own family's history. These events happened before I was born. Had things played out differently, I wouldn't be here today. The year was 1981. The Ketty Resort was a sleepy getaway nestled in the mountains of Northern California. It was the kind of place folks went to fish, drink, and forget about their troubles for a while. My family was staying at Cabin 28. My grandmother Sue, her 5 children, and a couple of their friends. They were just enjoying their stay and doing the typical things you would do at a cabin in the woods. They were completely unaware that something evil was making its way through the trees toward the resort and to Cabin 28. No one knows exactly what took place on the night of April 11th, 1981, but it was theorized that someone, possibly more than one person, knocked on the cabin door between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Investigators believed that the individuals were known to my grandmother, and she allowed them to enter the cabin. Once inside, the assailants attacked. There was a struggle. Sue, my Uncle John, 15, and his friend Dana, 17, were bound with wire, then struck and stabbed multiple times with a hammer and knife. The following morning, around 8 a.m., one of the daughters returned from a sleepover at her friend's cabin and discovered the bodies in the living room. She screamed and ran to the neighbors for help. Once the police arrived, it was discovered that one of the children was missing. It was my Aunt Tina, who was only 12 at the time. Her remains would be found 3 years later. It's possible she witnessed what took place in the living room that night and was abducted and later murdered in cold blood. Due to a botched investigation, no arrests were ever made, and the murders remained unsolved to this day. Bear in mind that there is much more to this story, and many questions surrounding this case have never been answered. I've summarized things a bit because these are my family members we're talking about, and I can't bring myself to go into further detail about their horrifying deaths. I will tell you that the girl who discovered the bodies the morning after is my mother, Sheila Sharp. People that I've shared this story with have made comparisons to the Friday the 13th movies, and I can definitely see why. However, I think most horror movie fans view Jason Voorhees as cool or badass, but I don't share their enthusiasm. Jason Voorhees is a fictional character, but the influences that created him are very real. In my case, it's hard for me to separate fiction from reality. I can't watch those films and not think about how all those deaths would affect so many families, like they did mine.
I'm a father of 4, and man, do I have a story to tell you. My wife and I both own a logging company outside of Charlottesville, Virginia, and primarily make our income through there. The business didn't start off great, but over time it improved significantly. My kids are both in middle school and are the best things I could ever ask for. My daughter is the youngest, while my son was just a year older than her. Back in the summer of 2019, we had taken a family camping trip down to the Carolinas as the highlight of our summer vacation. We had PTO, the kids were on summer break, it worked out perfectly. We had gone out to this really popular family campground in North Carolina, which was the ideal spot for the family. I helped my kids build their tent while my wife built ours we'd be staying in. Now, this campground isn't just some small area of the woods with a few small buildings. This place was huge, and you were pretty much allowed to set up your camp however far out you wanted. After we all got situated, my wife tells us that we should all go down to the dining hall for some dinner and dessert. With there being some buildings like the dining hall and a visitor center, it wasn't a real camping trip, but it was still fun for the family. We ate what food staff was serving along with maybe 3 or 4 other families also camping here. After dinner, we walked about 20 minutes before we went back to our campsite to get some sleep as we had planned on going fishing in the morning. I made sure my kids were asleep in their tent by 9 while my wife and I just read our books in our tent until we got tired. After a bit, we sort of drifted off to sleep and I'd say I slept for a good few hours or so. Now, let's fast forward to maybe a couple hours later. It was well into the night when I for some reason had this really weird dream/feeling. There's no real way to describe it without sounding morbid, but I was dreaming about my head being pinned with something sharp. Nobody in this dream was there but me, and the only thing I could really describe about it was the pain on my head. This went on for a good few minutes before I started to slowly wake up when I realized that the sharp pain persisted. I remember feeling around the top of my head only to find that it was also wet along with a low noise coming from behind me. Right then, my wife wakes up and screams her lungs out, spitting out the words to go away. I turn around and there, standing right in front of the tent opening, is a red fox in its defensive position. It growls at us before my wife manages to scare it away with her shoe. Turns out, that pain I was feeling was a damn fox clamping at the back of my head. And the reason why my head felt wet was because of the blood running down. At this point, my kids were wide awake crying when they realized what was happening. Right then, I began to feel sudden dizziness before almost falling to the ground. My wife had called the front desk of the campground and they had sent their medical team or whatever before rushing me to a hospital. After a couple of days, I did make it through and obviously recovered. Turns out though, we had set up our tents in a spot right next to a fox's nest that we didn't see. The fox probably mistakenly saw us as a threat to her and her cubs and did anything to protect them. It's been years now and I am fully recovered. It's just crazy to think that my dream turned into a reality.
The story happened roughly 15 years ago, and I just had to share it. Now that the company is dissolved, I shouldn't get into any trouble for sharing. I used to work for a company that built cars. I won't name the brand name or its location for privacy reasons. I worked in the finishing 2 department. Now, it's important to know the layout of our department. In our department, the actual frame of the car would be brought through on a massive assembly line. We had 3 lines in our department each for a different make of vehicle. There were 2 high pots on each line. These high pots were massive, probably the size of a pole barn and basically a building within the building. The first high pot on each line was a giant washer that would spray the unpainted frame down with silica, which is a very toxic chemical many factories use at a boiling 500 degrees Fahrenheit. This was done to clean off any impurities in the frame, and the silica made the paint stick to the frame better. After leaving the first high pot, it would go to the second one where the frame was dunked, flipped over, dragged, and pulled out of the giant pool of paint by a robot, and then sent down the line after going through the dryer. Anyway, these high pots have certain safety features on them. One being if you open a door while it's running, it trips the e-stop and sets off the alarms. However, the machine has to be stopped from the outside before the doors to it will unlock, and there's no stop button inside them. This will be important later. Anyway, we had this supervisor named Christy, and let me tell you, she was a bitch. Christy was a redhead in her 30s who didn't really care about anything. I literally heard her tell someone, "Look, I don't care if you have a heart attack and die." Yeah, she's that kind of person. She didn't really bother me too much. However, there was one employee over at the other high pot line that she had it out for. Armando. Armando was a Mexican guy in his 40s who had apparently immigrated to the United States only 4 years prior. He had been working there for roughly 1 year at this point. He was quiet, but he did a good job. Christy wouldn't leave him alone though, and whenever she thought nobody was listening, she would walk by him and just make really awful comments. One day I heard her walk by him and make an awful joke that I won't even repeat here. Little did she know this would set Armando over the edge. Later that day, I was running my line when I heard the alarms for the high pot washer on Armando's line go off. It probably just faulted out again, which actually happens regularly to all of our equipment. I didn't think much of it and just went back to my own line. 10 minutes later, I hear the alarms go off again, this time in a different tone, signaling the high pot is starting up. Then I hear screaming. Christy's muffled screaming. I look over and I see Christy in one of those plexiglass windows of the high pot washer screaming and banging on the door as the hot silica is being sprayed on her. I then look over to Armando and I'm expecting him to hit the e-stop or do something. But he doesn't. He just stands there watching with his arms crossed. I quickly run over the walkovers that cross over the conveyors. I have to cross 3 of those to get in his line, which takes about 1 minute. I run over to the control panel and press the e-stop, which unlocks all the doors on the high pot washer and sets off the alarms as well. Christy stumbles out of the access door to the high pot, and I'll never forget the horrifying scene of flesh melting away from her bones and blood beginning to ooze out that awaited me. Eventually, paramedics arrived and Christy was taken away, and Armando was taken away in handcuffs by the police. Apparently what happened is Armando stopped the washer and then just walked away. When Christy noticed it was down, she came over to investigate, and then went inside it as well when she didn't see Armando around. Armando then shut the door behind her and locked it and then started it back up again, spraying her to death with scalding hot silica. Apparently he was so sick of her harassment, and apparently HR had done nothing about it, that he just finally snapped. Armando was actually sentenced to life in prison for this, and Christy ended up dying from her injuries. OSHA began an investigation. However, the company went bankrupt 2 years later before the investigation was even finished, and the building was eventually demolished. I still think about that to this day, and I can't imagine a more horrifying way to die. My name is Reed and I'm a 25-year-old male. This is about the time I had a stalker at my job at a restaurant where I worked as a bartender. I never thought much about the people I worked with at the restaurant. It was just a job, something to pay the bills while I figured out the rest of my life. I bartended every night, working the late shift. Most of the customers were regulars. Old faces, late-night drunks, the occasional couple on a date. Nothing ever really stood out. That is, until I met her. Her name was Clara. She started about 3 weeks after I did, filling in for shifts when we got slammed. She wasn't anything special at first, just another person trying to get by. Tall, dark hair, a little too much makeup for the job. I never paid her much attention, just another face behind the counter. But there was something about her that just started to feel off. It was little things at first, like how she always stood just a little too close when we talked, or how she'd smile just a bit too long when she handed me an order. I didn't think much of it. I just chalked it up to her being new, maybe a little nervous around me or the job. But then it kept happening. She'd linger around the bar when it wasn't her shift, watching me work, asking if I needed help when I clearly didn't. She'd comment on how I made drinks or how I interacted with the customers, even though she wasn't exactly an expert herself. I caught her looking at me from across the room, her gaze lingering just a little too long. At first, I figured I was just imagining it, but after a few nights, I started to feel more like she was studying me. One evening, I was wiping down the bar after the last call when she came over. She had this tight smile on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're really good at what you do," she said, her voice soft but not exactly casual. "You've got this ease about you." I smiled back, kind of unsure on how to respond. "Thanks, I've been at it for a while." She nodded, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the bar almost absent-mindedly. Then she said, "Maybe we could hang out sometime. You know, outside of this place." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't rude, but I wasn't interested either. "I don't really think that'd be a good idea," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "I'm actually pretty busy outside of work." Her face faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, no worries. Just thought I'd ask." The next night, she had handed me a folded piece of paper when no one else was looking. She smiled like it was some kind of secret. "Just in case you change your mind," she said softly. "I'd like to spend more time with you." I opened the paper after she left. It was a phone number. I wasn't really sure what to make of it. I didn't want to be rude, so I pocketed it, figuring I could just ignore it if it came to that. But the whole interaction left a weird feeling in my stomach. Something didn't feel right. The following week, Clara's behavior escalated. She started showing up at the bar on nights when she wasn't scheduled to work. I'd be mixing drinks, and there she was, sitting at the counter with her usual drink, just watching me. At first, I thought she was just a regular customer, but then I noticed how she'd order the same thing every night, sip it slowly, and watch me work as if she was analyzing every little thing I did. I'd catch her staring at me when I wasn't looking, and when I did look up, she'd quickly glance away like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't have. The worst part was how she never seemed to talk to anyone else. She'd just sit there waiting for a moment when I wasn't busy to talk to me. I started to feel trapped, like I was walking a tightrope, unsure when she'd cross the line between friendly and, well, something else. One night after the bar had slowed down, I was wiping down the counter when she slid into the seat right in front of me. "Reed," she said softly, almost like she was telling me a secret. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I froze, the rag in my hand pausing mid-air. I tried to laugh it off. "Well, it's not like we don't see each other enough here." She didn't smile. "No, I mean, I really think we have something special. You're not like the other guys. You don't just see me as a bartender. You see me." I wasn't sure what to say to that. I didn't feel any special connection whatsoever. Nothing like that anyways. "I don't know what you mean, Clara." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the bar toward me. "It's for you. Just a little something." I hesitated, then took it. Inside was a card, a personal one, the kind you give someone you had a history with, not someone you just met. The note was simple but chilling. "We're meant to be together, Reed. I know you feel it too." I felt my stomach drop. My thoughts raced, but before I could say anything, she stood up and left, leaving me with that feeling of unease deep in my bones. That's when it started. The weird notes, the unexpected visits to my apartment, the awkward forced interactions where I'd try to be polite, but she just wouldn't take the hint. She started to follow me after work, waiting outside the restaurant sometimes, watching me walk to my car. She'd smile and wave, but I'd get into my car as quickly as I could, my hands shaking on the wheel. I couldn't take it anymore. One night after I got off late, I found a note on my windshield. "I know where you live, Reed. I'll be there soon." I went cold. I didn't know how she found out where I lived, but I couldn't ignore it. This wasn't some harmless crush anymore. She was stalking me. I had to talk to my manager. I told him everything. How Clara was making me uncomfortable. How I was scared to come to work. How I was feeling trapped by her constant presence. He listened, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. It was hard for him to believe me at first. But when I showed him the note on my windshield, his face dropped. The next day, Clara was fired. I'd heard from the other staff that she had been let go for unprofessional behavior. They didn't go into details, but I knew it was more than that. I wasn't the only one she had been bothering. Apparently, she'd been sending strange texts to a few other coworkers too, but I didn't find that out until later. My manager called me into his office after her firing. He seemed genuinely sorry about what had happened. "I know it's been rough," he said, "and I just want you to know if you ever want your job back, it's yours." But I didn't want to come back. I couldn't. I didn't feel safe there anymore. Not after everything that happened. The restaurant had been my escape, my routine, but it had turned into a place of anxiety. A place where I constantly looked over my shoulder. No amount of money was worth the constant fear I'd felt. "I appreciate the offer," I told him, "but I can't come back. It's just too much." I walked away from that job and I never looked back. It wasn't easy. Money was tight for a while, but I eventually found something else, something safer, quieter. But even now, there are moments when I'm walking down the street at night and I feel like I'm being watched. I'm always on edge, always checking over my shoulder. I don't know where Clara is now, or if she's even still out there. Maybe she's moved on to someone else. But I've learned that some things just stay with you even after they're gone. And for me, the worst part isn't even the fear anymore. It's the question that keeps me up some nights. What if she's still out there, waiting for me to slip up again? But that's a problem for someone else now. For me, well, I'm done. It was July 2011. I had just turned 21 and was living in the Piedmont region of North Carolina. Dating apps were still in their infancy, and I found myself gravitating towards Craigslist personals. It was raw, anonymous, and wide open, each post a gamble. Users would write short ads with vague descriptions. Sometimes they included a blurry photo. Most of the time, it was just a few bold sentences dangling mystery and danger. Young and naive, I wasn't looking for love, just a quick, exciting connection. I responded to one listing that immediately caught my eye. A woman replied almost instantly, which both surprised and excited me. Our chat started off innocent enough. Greetings, interests, light flirting. But soon, we were diving into fantasies of what we might do if we met. It was PG-13, at least for that era, and I was buzzing with adrenaline. After about 30 minutes, she asked for a picture. I sent her a selfie and requested one in return. What I received was a woman who looked to be in her mid-40s. She had shoulder-length blonde hair, hazel eyes, a warm smile, and breasts that seemed designed to scramble in the mind of a 21-year-old boy. Her body wasn't toned, but she appeared healthy, normal, like someone's attractive suburban mom. I was hooked. Then she asked, "Are you generous?" I didn't know what she meant. Generous how? Time, compliments? But I didn't want to sound dumb and risk ruining the moment. So I answered, "Of course I am." She then responded with, "Perfect," then gave me her address. She lived about 30 minutes away from me. I told her I'd head out right away. She replied, "Great, I'll get ready for you." The drive was a cocktail of excitement and nerves. I couldn't believe my luck. The idea that a woman like her wanted to meet me, just some skinny guy from the area, felt so surreal. But the closer I got, the quicker my confidence evaporated. The houses grew more run down, the yards cluttered with discarded furniture and trash bags. Streetlights flickered over cracked sidewalks and shuttered windows. I told myself not to judge her by where she lived. People fall on hard times, right? Still, the butterflies in my stomach started swarming into something darker. I arrived at a 2-story house. It wasn't as dilapidated as the others, which gave me a sliver of hope. I surveyed my surroundings carefully, marking anything that felt off. The street was quiet, no voices, no movement. Just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark from a dog down the block. Before getting out, I had all of my belongings in the car so there'd be nothing tempting to steal. I carried only my phone and more shoes I could run in just in case. I climbed the steps and knocked. A woman's voice answered from inside. "Come in." The door creaked as I entered, and my senses were immediately assaulted. The inside was absolute chaos. Newspapers stacked to the ceiling, crusty takeout containers balanced on shelves, boxes stuffed with random junk, and cereal spilling all across the floor. The smell wasn't overpowering, but carried the unmistakable scent of decay. Straight ahead was a staircase leading to the second floor. To the left, a living room bathed in flashing TV light. A tall man sat on the couch, arms stretched across the backrest, staring at the screen like he was waiting for something. Or someone. A chill ran through me. Who was he? Why didn't she mention anyone else being here? I called out, "Hey, where are you?" Her voice answered again, soft and sultry, this time from a room down the hallway. The man never once turned or spoke, just kept watching the screen like a silent gatekeeper. I moved cautiously, weaving through the towers of trash and grime. The hallway narrowed with debris, and the air grew heavier with each step. I peeked into the doorway and just froze. There she was, but she wasn't the woman from the photos. This woman was large, massive even. Her greasy brown hair hung limp, and the top of her scalp was patchy. Her face bore uneven makeup, with a few prominent moles barely masked. When she smiled, I only saw a handful of teeth behind streaks of red lipstick. She sat on what I assumed was a queen-size mattress, though most of it was buried under the trash. Her breasts barely sat inside a sheer stained nightgown. They hung to her knees as she sat wide-legged, motioning for me to come closer. But what truly turned my stomach wasn't her appearance. It was the environment. The bed she sat on looked molded, collapsing beneath her weight. Roaches scurried out from the mounds of trash she shifted to make space. The room was a biohazard. She gestured for me to sit beside her. I took one hesitant step in, still unsure how to exit without escalating things. She asked, "What would you like to see, dear?" while fondling herself. Then she said, "So, how generous are you going to be tonight?" Confused, I asked, What do you mean exactly?" She giggled. "How generous are you going to be with your payment?" Suddenly, it clicked. Generous was code. This wasn't a hookup. This was a transaction. I began backing out of the room, apologizing profusely. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't know this was that kind of arrangement." I was halfway down the hallway when the man from the couch stood up, now blocking the door. I felt the walls closing in. He was huge, easily 6'8", broad and unmoving. Behind me, the woman stormed into the doorway. "You wasted my time and you're not even going to pay for it?" she hissed. The man crossed his arms and spoke in a voice like steel. "It's either you pay for the time you wasted or I'll take the payment from you, little man." Fear pulsed in my chest. I was alone in a strange house, cornered. I had no backup, But then I thought of a way out. I stood tall. Well, as tall as a 5'5" guy could at 120 pounds. I then said, "If you really think I came out here without telling someone where I'm going, you're absolutely stupid. I told my friend before I left to expect a call within 45 minutes. If they don't hear from me, they're calling the cops." He squinted at me. "You're bluffing. You sure you want to take that gamble?" I said, pointing toward the window, "Because I smelled weed from the sidewalk, and the cops will too. You let me walk out right now and I'll forget this ever happened. But if you make this hard, you'll have 2 squad cars parked here in less than 10. Dead silence followed. Then the man turned to her and shrugged. "Look, this one's not worth it. Don't you have someone else coming later on?" She nodded, and without another word, the man stepped aside. I didn't wait. I walked out that door calmly, controlled, never turning back, never saying a word. I got in my car and drove off. The moment I was out of sight, I screamed. Relief, shock, anger. I was lucky, and I never went on Craigslist again. So picture this. It's about 4 in the morning. One of those cold, damp London weekdays where the air feels heavy and clings to you. I'd fallen down a video game rabbit hole, surfaced hours later, and I realized 2 things. 1, it was obscenely late, and 2, I'd completely forgotten to eat dinner. A quick, desperate scan of the kitchen confirmed the worst. Nothing. Damn it. My only hope was the 24-hour McDonald's drive-thru down the road. It's maybe a 10-minute walk, mostly through quiet suburban streets that feel almost unnervingly still at that hour. Coat on, I headed into the pre-dawn gloom. Habit took over, and I immediately stuck in my earphones, scrolling through my phone to catch up on the messages and notifications I'd blissfully ignored for the past several hours. In hindsight, I know exactly how that looks. Headphones in, face lit by a phone screen, completely oblivious to the world at 4 a.m. Prime target material, basically. I was about halfway there when I had registered movement just behind me. I glanced back. There was a guy swallowed by an oversized hoodie riding a bicycle. Except it wasn't a normal bike. It was painfully obviously a child's pink bicycle. The tiny frame looked ridiculous underneath him. He wasn't going anywhere specific, just doing slow wide loops on the empty street, always ending up slightly behind me. Now, I've lived in London for about 3 years. You see weird stuff. It's part of the background noise. My default programming kicked in. Head down, keep walking. Don't make eye contact. He'll get bored eventually. You know, standard operating procedure for navigating the city's low-level strangeness. But then he wasn't behind me anymore. He smoothly cycled up right alongside me, matching my pace. The ignore it strategy suddenly felt very thin. He was muttering something. It was clear he wanted my attention. Reluctantly, I pulled out one earbud, still walking, trying for casual indifference. My automatic defense mechanism fired off before I even properly heard him. "I'm sorry, I don't have any change." That's when I made the mistake of actually looking at him. He wasn't asking for change. His eyes locked onto mine, and there was a hard, focused intensity there that immediately set off alarm bells. My gaze flickered down. His right hand was shoved deep into the front pocket of his hoodie, pushing the fabric outwards. Oh, it wasn't a slow dawning realization, more like a sudden plunge into ice water. The casual weirdness evaporated, replaced by cold, sharp-edged fear. That's when I properly registered his words, spoken low but clear. "Give me your phone." My feet kept moving, seemingly on autopilot, but the rest of me felt frozen. My brain felt like it was buffering, trying to process the demand against the very real possibility of what was in that pocket. Is he bluffing? Is that a knife? Is this phone I literally just got and definitely can't afford to replace, worth getting stabbed over? The mental calculus was frantic and terrifying. We were still moving forward side by side in this bizarre, terrifying mobile standoff. Me staring straight ahead, hyper aware of him right beside me, and my mind racing. And then a sound. The distinct rumble of a car engine growing louder, Headlights swept across the end of the street, illuminating the junction just yards ahead. A brief moment of blinding light. I shot a look back at the guy on the tiny pink bike. The thought flashed. Run! Make a break for the car, for the light. But before the thought could even translate into action, he abruptly swerved. He pushed off hard on the tiny pedals, cycling rapidly down the street, disappearing back into the shadows as quickly as he'd appeared. I just stood there for a second, hard hammering against my ribs. Then the next thought hit me. Crap, I still have to walk home. Needless to say, the McDonald's craving vanished instantly. On the way back, the headphones stayed off, and my phone stayed deep in my pocket, clutched in my hand. I also gave the quiet suburban streets a wide berth. Instead, I took the long way round, sticking to the main A road. It's noisy, choked with fumes even at this hour, and the pavement is basically a narrow, neglected strip inches away from speeding traffic. It felt horrible, but infinitely safer. The constant stream of headlights, the drone of engines. It was unpleasant, but it was a presence. Company of a sort. Thankfully, the rest of the walk was uneventful. No more unexpected cyclists emerged from the dark. But yeah, I'm just really glad that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Guy on a tiny pink bike at 4 a.m. demanding my phone. Hopefully I don't ever encounter you again. The story takes place in a remote area of the UK, but to protect the people involved, I won't say the exact location. My friend Zara, a British Pakistani influencer, had just recently had her second child, and her husband had gone away on a golf holiday, leaving her alone with the 2 children. She was used to being left alone, as her husband often worked away from home too, and would often go away on vacation with his friends, leaving her alone to take care of the children. It was a stormy October night and there was lots of thunder, so it was pretty noisy. She started to feel uncomfortable as it was getting dark early and her house is fairly isolated. So all the noise from outside was, well, getting to her. At around 9 p.m., she had just finished a cup of coffee in the kitchen. The children were asleep and Zara was making sure the house was locked up for the night. She went back into the kitchen and she saw that the back door was slightly open. She started to approach it, but then felt very dizzy, stumbling, and she fainted. Zara slowly regained consciousness and sat on a chair in the kitchen. The first thing she was aware of was how heavily she was breathing through her nose. She felt something covering her mouth, and after twisting her lips, she realized it was sticky tape that was sealing her lips. Zara started to panic and tried to talk and shout, but the gag around her mouth was preventing this. She struggled to move as well, as she could feel her hands were taped together behind the chair, and when she looked down, she was duct taped to the chair and her feet were taped together as well. Her hard breathing popped the duct tape covering her mouth in and out. Then the lamp over her head switched on. Standing there before her was a medium-built man with a hood on and a scarf covering his lower face. At this point, Zara was obviously petrified and was mainly concerned for her 2 children sleeping upstairs. The man then said,
"I won't hurt you, but do you keep money in the house?"
Zara mumbled a "no" against the tape. The man had a large bag which he had filled with items such as Dubai jewelry from around the house. The next thing he said sent a chill up Zara's back.
"Don't worry, your kids are still asleep."
He then went to leave through the back kitchen door, and before exiting turned and said,
"I just want you to know I'm sorry for this."
Then he left. Zara struggled for a few minutes and then eventually freed her mouth from the tape by twisting her mouth and biting on the tape. She immediately ran to check on her children who had both slept through the entire ordeal. She phoned the police and the man was eventually apprehended later that week. As mentioned, Zara has an online presence, so the man was aware of this and was aware that she was often left alone. He admitted to gaining entry to the back door and drugged her coffee, which explains why she fainted. The burglar said that he had lost his business and was in a desperate situation with the state of the economy, but that he didn't wish to harm anyone. Zara bears a strong resemblance to Kim Kardashian, and the fact that she's a micro-influencer is likely what gave him this idea, as a similar situation happened with Kim Kardashian just a few years earlier. Zara is a very strong, feisty young woman, so she did eventually learn to live with the situation, However, it's not something you can ever fully recover from. She couldn't help but feel sorry for the man who did this, but the feeling she had when she was in that position is something she'll never forget. Mid-fall of last year, I agreed to a babysitting gig, as I'm known around my neighborhood as a relatively available person to watch kids. I personally don't really love kids, but I definitely think it's fun to be a mom for a couple of hours. I went over at around 3 to meet the parents and children who lived a few minutes away from me. I had to drive there as the road to connect our streets wasn't finished, so I couldn't walk like I wanted to. This is important to the story. I walked up to the door and was welcomed in, and the family was kind, of course. 3 children, 2 older kids and a toddler who I can't remember the specific ages of, but it's not too important. The parents eventually headed out to the sports game they were going to, which I was aware was going to be several hours, as they were also going to the bar after the game. So their plan was to arrive at 11 to 11:30 p.m., which was fine with me as I tend to stay up later than that anyways. The first few hours are normal. I make them dinner and we head to the basement to play and watch some movies like any other babysitter would do. It started to get dark and time had slipped my mind. And as I went back upstairs, I had realized how late it had gotten because the house was quite literally more windows than walls. The house had a daylight basement, so yes, there were windows downstairs, but I was facing away from them, so I didn't see the sky fade into the nighttime. I went upstairs and checked every single window in the house, as well as all the locks, closets, and any spot where someone could be hiding, as I'm extremely paranoid. And I also like to check for the kids because they had also mentioned me needing to scare the monsters away, which is how most kids tell you they're scared. But I was also scared, of course. I want to mention that I'm in the top 4% of viewers for Southern Cannibal, and I was thinking of this channel when the attempted break-in took place. Anyways, I cleared the house of any creepers and I went back downstairs to get everyone changed and ready for bed. As I was wrapping up, I had heard some neighbors' dogs howling, which I wasn't too concerned about as I've babysat and pet sat for the dogs and kids in that neighborhood. And I knew it wasn't too much to be concerned about since there are foxes all over the yard since there's lots of fields and hills where I live at. I finished everything and took everyone in for bedtime and head upstairs to go have a snack since it was about 9:45 and I hadn't had dinner with the kids because I didn't want to eat all their food, and I figured I'd just wait so I could raid the pantry without them asking for chips or a soda too. My favorite part of being a babysitter is of course the free food. As I headed upstairs, I immediately remembered that I'd completely forgotten to lock the front door as I was so worried about checking everything else, so I quickly walked to the door and locked it. It's a modern lock, the type that you need to put a code in, but there was also a top lock for extra security, which probably saved me from a horrific night. The windows around the door are the frosty type for privacy, so I couldn't see any distinct figures, but I noticed that there was nothing abnormal out there. I walked to the bathroom to then let out my poop I had been holding in for hours at that point. Sorry guys, but when you gotta go, you gotta go. The bathroom is almost directly behind the front door, but slightly to the side, so from the bathroom door, I had a straight view onto the porch steps and a little bit of the rest of the front yard, but again, no distinct figures, just blobs. I finished doing my poop, which took me a few minutes as I scrolled on Instagram Reels longer than I actually shat. I opened the door and immediately I was so grateful that I had just gone to the restroom, as I for sure would have shit myself in that moment if I hadn't. I see a figure outside the door, and I freeze in case they can see me too moving inside. I watch as they slowly cup up their hands against the side window, and I see it's a darker skinned man, which will be important in a moment. I watched him walk back down the steps, and luckily I had turned every light off in the home, so maybe he thought there was nobody there since my car was parked across the street, so it didn't look like any cars were actually at the house I was in. As I see him move away, I go to look out the peephole of the door, and I see him cross the street, do the same thing to my car, and try the door handles. Within a few minutes, he wanders off down into the street out of sight. There's an old folks' home near the houses, and I assumed it was possibly a confused elder, which has happened before in this area. I make sure everything is locked again, and I go to the pantry to then grab some food, when I turn around and see the little boy had come upstairs and said he saw someone in the backyard, and my heart damn near stopped. I said it was just a tree or bush moving in the wind, and he was definitely partially awake, as when I walked him downstairs to his bed again to tuck him in, he was passed out in seconds. I then close all the curtains all the way down again, when I see shoe prints in the mud by the back sliding door. The backyards in this area are rarely ever finished, since the houses are all new, so most of the landscapes are half grass, half dirt from the construction. I realized the man had probably scoped out the downstairs first and seen nothing going on and then moved upstairs to the door. I checked the peephole upstairs to see slight mud prints on the front porch, where my suspicion was confirmed. As I'm looking, I see the man emerge from the side of the garage again, and my stomach turns with disgust. But he kept walking through the yards of the neighborhood, which I found extremely odd. I was thinking of calling the police, but technically he hasn't done anything wrong other than loitering maybe, but there's no cameras to see how long he's been on the property. Plus, I didn't want to ruin the parents' night and make them come home early. I continued eating my snack in the kitchen on the floor, in the most private area of this completely windowed house where it was impossible to hide, when I hear the sound of the electric lock buzzing. There's a specific sound when the door is successfully unlocked, and to my horror, it makes that damn sound. I stop breathing as I crawl out of the corner and grab the first thing I see, which is a serrated knife I had used to cut up some bread earlier for sandwiches. I then realized I had slid the top lock over, which prevented anyone from opening the door anyways when I could still hear this freak trying to enter the house. I walked to the guest bedroom to get a better view. The front door is tucked between the guest room and garage on each side, so there was a window on the very front of the guest room that gave me a good view of the porch to see the man. This guy had the worst skin I had ever seen, not related to his color of course, but there were deep marks from what looked like picking needles and who knows what else. I see his hair. It's these extremely grown out locks, dirty hands covered in mud, and finally no shoes. I was peeking through the blinds so the man didn't see me. As his feet were pressed up towards the bottom of the door, I quickly crawled to the door again, and as quickly as I could tried to cut the rubber seal off the door that keeps the weather out. As I get it off, I shove the knife under the door and start going back and forth, and I hear him run off. I immediately told the parents, and they were already heading home, and I decided to explain to them what happened and why their door has no way to keep out the door air now. I have no clue what this man's intentions were, or if I actually got him with the knife. Months later, I saw on the news of my city that a man had been charged for drug trafficking and attempted burglary in my city on other homes. I know it's wrong to keep this to myself, but I have zero evidence of this actually happening, as the family hadn't set up any cameras anywhere, and neither had the neighbors since these homes were new and nobody thought to install them or get a Ring camera, which is weird because in today's world I would never go without cameras at every entrance of my own house. I hope nobody else was seriously harmed, and I hope the man has received the proper punishments and/or mental help he needs. I ended up getting paid extra, but I also never got to have the snacks that I'd been eyeing down the whole evening before this disaster. Thanks for sharing all these stories to help people be more aware. It's truly helped me learn how to keep myself safe in my own home by setting up the proper alarms and cameras, and also how to recognize weird or odd behaviors from others. Happy holidays, everyone. Hi everyone. This happened several years ago, and for a long time I stopped talking about it altogether. Not because it didn't matter anymore, because people tend to respond with hindsight instead of empathy. They ask what you should have done without understanding how fear rewires your brain in the moment. But I think people hearing this will understand, so here it is. At the time, I was living in a second-floor apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a quiet area, the kind of place where neighbors waved politely but kept to themselves. I worked as a medical assistant in a small clinic, and my schedule usually had me home by early evening. That afternoon, I came home just after 5 p.m. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let it close behind me with a dull click. I tossed my purse on the counter, set my phone beside it, and kicked off my shoes. I didn't bother locking the door, something I'd done countless times before without a second thought. My partner was supposed to be home within the hour away. That habit ended that day. I walked down the hallway toward the bedroom, sorting laundry and half listening to the hum of the traffic outside. I was in the middle of hanging up clothes when I had heard the front door open.
I smiled instinctively and called out, "Hey, I'm back here." There was no response. That uneasy feeling, the one you can't quite explain, settled in immediately. I stepped out of the bedroom and into the living room. Someone was standing near the kitchen counter. He wasn't masked. He wasn't holding anything. He was just there. A man that I had never seen before, older than me, watching me silently like I had surprised him. For a brief foolish moment, I wondered if he had the wrong apartment. That thought vanished when he didn't apologize or move. I raised my voice and I told him immediately that he needed to leave. I tried to sound confident, tried to make myself bigger than I felt. He didn't react. Instead, he reached down and picked up my phone, then my wallet, then my keys. One by one, calmly, like he had all the time in the world. That was when panic really took over. The only other way I could contact anyone was my laptop sitting on the desk by the window. I rushed toward it, grabbed it, and ran past him toward the bathroom. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as I heard footsteps behind me. Within seconds, the handle rattled. I ran into the closet, locked that door too, and dropped to the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't open the laptop. I logged into the first messaging app I could think of and sent frantic messages to my partner, begging him to call the police. He replied quickly. He said help was on the way. He said that he was leaving work also. I sat there, knees pulled into my chest, listening. The bathroom door opened. Footsteps moved closer. The closet door shook violently, then stopped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry out. I didn't fight. I was frozen completely, utterly frozen, convinced that if the door gave way, that would be the end. Now, usually when people hear this part, they often ask why I didn't do more. I don't have a satisfying answer. Fear doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like stillness. The noises moved away. I heard things breaking, cabinets opening, glass shattering. Time stretched and warped until I had no idea how long I'd been there. I messaged my mother. She lived states away. I told her I loved her. I asked her to keep replying even if I couldn't respond right away. I didn't want to be alone. Eventually, the front door opened again, this time followed by shouting. I recognized my partner's voice. Moments later, everything blurred. I remember the intruder being restrained. I remember sitting on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. I remember the police lights through the windows. The officers arrived way later than I expected, though I know fear distorts time. They took the man away, and I got my belongings back. I answered questions mechanically. As one officer was leaving, he told me that I should always lock my door. At the time, it felt like blame. Later, I just understood it was experience speaking. The incident itself lasted less than an hour. The aftermath lasted years. Even after we moved to a quieter town, to a safer building, to a place with only one entrance, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt threatening. Every night felt like I was waiting for something terrible to just happen again. Eventually, I realized that the fear wasn't about where I lived. It was about how helpless I still felt. So I did something uncomfortable. I walked into a self-defense studio and signed up. At first, I stayed quiet. I stood in the back. I avoided attention. But over time, slowly and deliberately, I rebuilt something I thought I'd lost forever. My confidence, control, trust in myself. I've trained for years now. The person I was in that closet still exists, but she no longer defines me. I don't judge her anymore. She survived the only way she knew how, and now I know more. If you've experienced something like this and you still feel haunted by it, I want you to know you're not weak and you're not broken. Healing doesn't look the same for everyone, and there's no timeline for it. Thank you all for listening. If sharing this helps even one person feel less alone, then it was worth it. Stay safe. This is still the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. What haunts me isn't just what occurred, but how narrowly I avoided something far worse. Sometimes I replay it in my head and realize that a single different choice, a single second longer, and I might not be here to tell this story at all. This happened about 4 years ago. It was when I was in my early 20s and still in university. On paper, my life was stable. I lived in a quiet neighborhood most people considered safe, tree-lined streets, families out walking in the evenings, nothing that ever made the news. I shared a modest apartment with my younger cousin, and we had an aging spoiled cat who believed the entire building belonged to him. Growing up, I'd always loved combat sports. I wasn't exceptional, but I was committed. I trained in whatever was available. Boxing, jiu-jitsu, a bit of karate, anything that taught me discipline and awareness. Training gave me confidence in my body and my reactions. But when I moved to the city for school, reality took over. Long commutes, endless coursework, late nights. Slowly, training slipped out of my routine until it became something I told myself I'd get back to someday. Our apartment just sat above ground level. The back of the building faced a neglected strip of greenery, a tangled mess of trees and brush that separated our building from an old service road. There was a narrow metal staircase attached to our kitchen balcony that led straight down into the shadows. It wasn't something I liked to think about, but we always kept that door locked. Always, except when the cat wanted out. My days were exhausting. I left home late in the morning and often didn't return until after dark. So when a friend offered to drive me home one evening, cutting my commute in half, I was relieved. I arrived much earlier than usual, just as the sky was dimming into dusk. The building felt strangely still. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and called out my cousin's name out of habit. No answer. This wasn't unusual. He was often out and doing things. But something about the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was so tense. Only one lamp was on near the entryway. The rest of the apartment was dark. I remember pausing, my hand still on the door, listening. Nothing. Yet my stomach tightened, that familiar instinctive warning that something wasn't right. I moved slowly down the hallway toward the bedrooms. That's when I heard it. A door slammed, hard enough to echo throughout the apartment. It came from my cousin's room. At first, my mind scrambled for a normal explanation. You know, maybe he'd been showering and just panicked when he heard me come in. Maybe he was playing some kind of a prank. But then I heard voices, low hurried whispers, not playful, not familiar. They sounded urgent, pressed. My heart started pounding. I became painfully aware of every sound I made, the creak on the floor, my own breathing. Before I reached his door, I glanced into my bedroom. It looked like a bomb had gone off. My drawers were pulled out, clothes scattered everywhere. Books lay face down on the floor. My desk was bare, as if someone had swept everything off of it in one violent motion. That was the moment everything clicked. Someone had been inside my home. Fear didn't freeze me, it flipped a switch. I didn't think. I didn't calculate risks. My body just moved before my brain could catch up. I slammed my shoulder into my cousin's bedroom door with everything I had. The door burst open. The room was empty but destroyed. Mattress askew, closet torn apart, belongings strewn everywhere. Whoever had been whispering moments ago was gone. I sprinted toward the kitchen, adrenaline roaring in my ears, and threw open the balcony door. Just in time, I saw a man scrambling down the metal staircase. He stumbled when he hit the ground, almost collapsing before regaining his balance. He looked ordinary. That's what terrified me most. No mask, no weapon, just a regular man who had been rifling through my life moments earlier. I screamed, raw, furious, wordless, and he bolted into the darkness beyond the trees. He was gone. The adrenaline drained fast, replaced by shaking panic. Then I realized what was missing. It was my laptop. I tore through the apartment in a frenzy, sobbing, pulling things apart that were already destroyed. Now, that laptop wasn't just an object. It held my schoolwork, my personal files, my connection to my friends that I talked to every day. Losing it felt like I was losing my footing entirely. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, my hands numb. I called my mom. I don't remember what I said, only that she kept asking me to slow down. Later, she told me that my words were all jumbled, switching languages mid-sentence without warning. The police arrived eventually. They asked questions, took notes. I looked around. Their presence felt hollow, like a formality rather than protection. That's when we found it. A pillowcase stuffed with our belongings abandoned in the chaos. Both laptops, jewelry, and old electronics. Inches away from where I'd been searching, unseen because my mind was still spiraling. Nothing ever came out of the investigation. We removed the staircase and installed motion lights. I tried to rebuild a sense of safety, but something fundamental had shifted. For months afterward, every shadow made my muscles tense. Every unfamiliar face near my bus stop sparked irrational fear and anger. I caught myself scanning crowds, replaying the scene, imagining what I would do if I ever saw that man again. Eventually, we moved, and I went back to training. Not because I believed I could overpower danger, but because I refused to live feeling helpless. Training grounded me. It gave me some kind of control over my breath, my reactions, and my fear. It reminded me that strength doesn't disappear, it just waits to be reclaimed. Sometimes I still think about that awful night, about how thin that door was, how easily my blind courage could have gotten me killed. And yet, if I'm honest, I know myself. I probably would have charged in anyway. To whoever decided my home was an easy target, you took something away from me that night, my sense of safety, but you didn't take my resolve. And if our paths ever cross again, I promise you I won't be the same person you ran from.
When I was about 4, this was in 1997, my mum and brothers went to a water park on a weekend during the summer. The park was set up so that you would walk through the entrance and run directly into a food court with the little information or map station there. To the left was inside an arcade area with a roller coaster, a little one, directly outside of it, and behind the arcade building was an enormous wave pool. To the right of the entrance was the kiddie park, and then behind the kiddie park was a lazy river and all the water slides with it. Since my brothers were older and they wanted to ride the big slides, my mum and me split from them to head to the kiddie park. I remember playing for a little while, making some friends with some of the kids, when this one little boy asked me if I wanted to go to the wave pool. Since I was little, my mum told me that I was not allowed to go to the wave pool, at least without an adult, so I told him that I couldn't. He then said that it's not a problem. My dad is already waiting for us, and he's already told my mum that he was going to watch us. Well, being a dumb kid and marveling at the wave pool since we got there, I was pretty much sold and followed him over there. My mum probably didn't notice at the time because the lawn chair that she was sitting in around the kiddie pool was being blocked by little kid slides and billions of other little children. But we headed to the wave pool and met the kid's dad. He immediately took my hand and guided me into the wave pool. I remember only being there for like 2 minutes tops until he picked me up and carried me back out of the pool. I don't think that I even asked where we were going, but I assumed the food court because that's where we were headed. I then remember reaching the entrance gates and a lifeguard approached us and asked if my name was so-and-so, and I said yes, and started crying because I guess I thought that I was in trouble. The lifeguard then grabs me from the dude, and I see my mum running up sobbing. Years later, we're revisiting this story, and she tells me that she noticed that I was missing pretty quickly and told a lifeguard to close off the entrance to the park. I was wearing a yellow bathing suit with pink flowers on it and 2 yellow ribbons in my hair, so the description gave me away instantly when the man was carrying me out, that is. I asked my mum about the kid, and she had no idea what I was talking about. She said that it was just the singular man, and apparently he ran to his car in the parking lot as soon as the lifeguard took me out of his arms. In other words, there was no kid with him. One night while I was about 17 or maybe 18, I was living in this old Victorian home on the top floor. I lived alone. You could afford to live alone back then. And it was a creepy place. I loved the upstairs. It was very nicely done, and it was only $279 a month, close to the downtown of the city that I was living in. Now, one night, I was unexpectedly in for the evening, I had a full-time job, a part-time job as well, and a very active social life, so being home alone was pretty rare for me. It was raining very hard that day, and I remember looking outside and watching the puddles get bigger and bigger. I went to bed quite early. Suddenly, though, I woke up abruptly after what felt like I had been sleeping for a long time. It was completely dark, almost pitch black in my bedroom. There was just a bit of light in the corner of my room from the streetlight outside. I looked at my digital bedside clock. I had only been asleep for 5 minutes at the most, though. I kind of got chills then, and I heard what I can only describe as like a hissing sound. I looked up to the ceiling of my bedroom, and there was a black blob-like form that was just moving and changing size and slowly making its way to me. By the time the realization that it was coming to me hit me, I became unable to move my limbs, my body. I could not talk or scream. I just laid there, unable to do anything but watch it get closer to me. When it reached me, it just kind of settled on me. I could feel its weight. I couldn't close my eyes. I so desperately wanted to, but I just couldn't. The terror that I felt cannot be described, though. The evil that I felt from this form was immense, and I have not felt anything like this, that kind of evil, in my life ever. After what seemed like hours, though, suddenly it was gone. My room got brighter and I was able to move again. I checked my clock, but again, only 5 minutes had passed. This experience happened 2 more times while I was living in that old Victorian house. I later learned, though, through research at the library, that I had apparently been visited by an incubus. When I returned to the city that I grew up in and lived in that house, I drive by it. It's still standing, and I don't know if it's divided up into 3 separate apartments now, but it's a lot more run down, that's for sure. A lot of strange things would happen in those rooms. Things would go missing, and I'd find them in very odd places. And as far as I'm concerned, that house, it's definitely haunted. I was traveling with some friends on some 4x4 trails in southern Idaho. We were camping out one night, singing music around a campfire for quite a while, and my friends decided to go to bed eventually. My ex and I stayed up a little bit longer, hanging out around the fire and just enjoying the atmosphere. Then suddenly, everything just got dead silent, like the world got put on mute. I'm no stranger to this phenomenon. It generally happens when there's a predator nearby, and being in bear country, I had my bear spray on me, so I wasn't too worried. My ex and I continued to enjoy the fire, though, until we heard someone way off in the distance say, "honey," 3 times. You could tell it was far away, but it also had the sound of a whisper rather than a yell, an almost questioning tone, like it was a woman calling out for her husband. My friend peeked out of his rooftop tent and asked if we were the ones calling out, but we weren't. The weirdest thing, though, is that it just didn't sound right. More so something that sounds like a woman calling out honey, but not actually a human woman. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but the more rational side of us decided that it may have been a hiker or something. The moon was full, so the idea of a couple hiking at night, especially since we weren't too far from the nearest town, wasn't too unlikely, I guess. My friend and his girlfriend, they decided to rejoin us for a little bit, and they also commented on the lack of wildlife sounds. We sat for a few more minutes before, again, hearing that honey sound. My friend agreed that it didn't sound right at all. He called out hello just in case there was some poor lost woman somewhere, but nothing responded. A few minutes later, we heard the same call, but from the complete opposite direction. With how far it sounded, there is just no way some lost hiker could have circled all the way around our camp that quickly. We lit up our floodlights, and we quickly booked it out of the area, and ended up cutting our overland trip very short. I still have no idea who or what made those noises, and it really still creeps me the heck out. Honestly, too, I'm really not sure if I'll be traveling to southern Idaho ever again. Now, I know that this sounds fantastical and wild, and honestly, I couldn't disagree. This is in fairly remote backcountry, West Virginia, which is known for being old and haunted. It was experienced entirely by the two of us, but the worst parts by all four. This led to all four of us at some point battling personal issues in our lives that I believe stemmed directly from this encounter. The following is, at least to my memory and what I've been able to corroborate with the other people that were there, 100% accurate and true. So when I was 17, 2004, we had a bad experience camping near haunted train tunnels and sites of sudden tragic death. The history of the immediate 1 square mile area is that mother and son drowning in the creek nearby, drug dealers killed in state police shootout at a nearby hunting cabin, and many years before, cheap laborers had been killed building this double set of train tunnels. They were actually buried in a long-forgotten little graveyard nearby the tunnels that has since been found and restored. We decided to go camping before graduation, as a friend group of 4, just to do something one last time before we all went our separate ways in life. This is a private property on the backside of a big hill around which the creek flows in a huge several-mile-long bend. A camp set up and fire going. Shortly after nightfall, my cousin and I sat back on the creek bed, maybe 20 yards away from the camp spotlight, fish in the water. We then began to hear a sort of, rhythmic sloshing sound. A slosh of what sounded like somebody wading through the water, maybe halfway up to their shin deep. So we shined the light around upstream, and we then spotted symmetrically and rhythmically consistent disturbances made by what looked and sounded like invisible feet or legs sloshing toward us. When we would turn our spotlights off, it would start again. It would then stop when illuminated, and whatever it was definitely reacting to us. And this was the first ice bucket stomach clench moment we knew that this was not fish and could not rationalize what was actually happening. This scared us pretty badly, but we decided best to be kept to ourselves and join the others gathered at the fire suddenly. As we made our way back, we heard the sloshing make its way to where we were on the bank and the noise stopped. Given the speed that we witnessed it moving and how far it was from us when we were watching it, it must have sped up to make it to the bank that we were on in the amount of time that it took us to get to the camp. Others at the camp heard it as well and figured that we'd either gotten in or somehow riled up some fish, but we just played it off in the end. And as crazy as it sounded and looked like an invisible person wading towards us through the water. After the noise ended at the creek bank, we then all saw the tall grass disturbed as something that we couldn't see ran around the foliage perimeter of our circularly cleared campsite. Now, this could have been an animal, I admit, but whatever it was fast. We then began to hear what sounded like a man talking to us, as in speaking into the ear of each person, the left ear, if that matters. At first, it sounded like garble, really, but after maybe 15 to 20 seconds, we could make out the words saying we shouldn't be there, and we needed to leave, before finally addressing us directly and saying slightly more forcefully, "You need to leave." Obviously, as you can imagine, this was absolutely terrifying, and at first we thought that it was a person or group of people out there walking up on our camp and that it was dangerous. We were all frozen with fear though, but then adrenaline suddenly hit. As we freaked out and started to run to our ATV, all 4 of us saw what we all described as a tall black shadow man wearing what looked like a hat, relaxing against the front of our ATV. It straightened up when we saw it, and it saw us, allegedly, and it just sort of hung there staring at us for a few seconds. No feet, the legs ended in sort of wavy lines, like looking above the fire at the heat waves. It stood out against the dark night behind it, though, and it was definitely there. The girl screamed, which broke our fear freeze, and It zipped like the Flash back towards the train tunnels people had died in. Interestingly, when we went to start the ATV, it sort of turned over sluggishly as if the battery had been slightly drained, despite working fine not long before when we rode it down. This entire event happened over the course of, I don't know, I want to say maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and within an hour of the sun going down. After putting our story out there, I received a lot of feedback from people as well who have also had bad encounters in this area over many years. Even a guy I worked with who didn't know that we knew this area told me that my uncle had hired him to trap in that area, and it was the only place that he didn't check traps alone at night. He said that it was almost like the animals leave the place at night and it was completely quiet out there. No less than a month later, my uncle who owns the property was up on the hill raccoon hunting at night with a dog. At some point the dog was on a rock face up above him and actually knocked a large rock loose that fell and struck my uncle in the side of the neck. This understandably messed him up pretty bad and paralyzed almost his entire body, but he still had limited functionality on his left side. We could never figure out how he got himself back to his ATV and turned it over and drove himself out of there because, really, he just wasn't capable of that anymore. It wasn't until probably maybe 2 or 3 years later, around Halloween, when my story makes its rounds on the local Facebook groups, that my uncle texted my mother out of the blue. You have no reason to believe my uncle's character reference, but honestly, he is a salt-of-the-earth, hunting, farming, working sort of man. Even working past his retirement as a millionaire. He's honest, funny, and just incredibly a stand-up guy. He is easygoing, but also no nonsense for sure. In his text to my mother, though, he said, "I've never told anybody this before, and I probably won't again. But the man in the hat that the kids saw at the creek that night helped pick me up off the ground and put me back on the ATV and turned me around." Until I heard that, I had always assumed that the Shadow Man was the one who was trying to scare us out of there, but thinking back on it, maybe he was the one whispering to us, telling us that we needed to leave and possibly avoid something scarier and more dangerous. Although I honestly have no idea what could have been scarier than that. Here and talk about my house and some of the weird stuff that's been going on recently in it. I've lived in this house alone for about 5 years now, I would say. Nothing really noteworthy happened until 2021, and it really wasn't anything crazy. Like small stuff. My garage door would be open when I thought that I'd closed it. The sink is running, cupboards open, etc. I started noticing other stuff happening around that time as well, though. I would think that I'd hear footsteps around my house, but it was always something that I thought that I could play off as just being tired since my work full-time along with college and all that. It didn't happen all too often as well, so I didn't really worry too much about it. But it started to become more frequent as years have gone by, and recently a few things have happened that have definitely got me pretty spooked, to the point that I've stayed at a friend's house because of them. I'll share them now, but I'm really not sure what I want out of this. Maybe some clarity or something, or some advice on what to do, but yeah, here's what happened. So the first thing that happened was around August of 2024. I was sitting in my office room doing some homework and playing some music. I started to hear what I thought sounded like a woman at my door. Now, I note, my next door neighbor is a single mother, and she goes on walks past my house literally every night. Figuring that she might be at my door asking for something, I open the door, only to find no one there. I close the door and sit back down, and over the next week or so, I started hearing what I thought was a woman talking just out of earshot. I would think that it was my TVs, but I keep them off when I'm not using them. I was pretty stumped and frustrated over it as well. It all built up too as well to one night where I'm laying in bed and I hear this same voice, lady just out of earshot, talking at my bedroom door, Tired and creeped out, I jumped out of bed to check, only to find when opening my door, nobody was there. It chilled me enough to where goosebumps formed. I locked my bedroom door, which I never do, and got back into bed. Maybe 5 minutes later, it started happening again. I got back up and literally screamed, "Leave me alone," packed a bag, and I ended up spending the night at a friend's house a little ways down the street, and it hasn't happened since. The next incident happened about a month ago. Doing homework in my room, all of a sudden my home phone starts ringing. Problem is that I haven't had a phone connected since the hurricane swept through Florida, and have had no reason to put it back in. I quickly jumped out of my bed, shuffled out to check the phone, and sure enough, it's ringing at me. I picked it up and it immediately died. I have absolutely no clue how this could have rung as well, unless the phone battery is jacked up or something. Since then, I have thrown the phone away because, to heck with that, right? Now, this next one is the one that made me want to come on here and talk about my experience thus far. This happened about a week ago. So, I have a boxer puppy who turns 1 on Saturday, by the way, who is usually pretty relaxed. I've never seen him frightened because, frankly, he just doesn't even know what's going on half the time. It's probably about 1 or 2 in the morning. I'm chilling in my kitchen. Knox is laying next to me, probably wanting my food. Eventually, he walks away, and as I finally indulge into said food, he stops about 6 feet from my garage door and starts growling. Like, tail up, looking like he's going to bite someone, kind of growl. Mind you, I've never seen him growl like this, not once, so I was a little bit freaked out from the get-go, to say the least. I try calling him back over, but he is absolutely dialed into whatever he's growling at. I start walking over slowly to him. I turn the corner to look at my door, and it literally slams. It sounds like a giant object slammed right into my door, loud as anything. My dog jumps back and runs to go hide in my room. I, on the other hand, open my door, run into my garage to see if someone had tried to break in, only to see that everything was perfectly quiet. The door was fine too. Needless to say, I grabbed the dog up and we drove to stay at my friend's house for the night again after that. Since then too, I've been on edge the past week being at my own home. It feels like I have to watch my back constantly now because something just might happen. I'm losing sleep over this, and honestly, I really just don't know what to do at this point.
It was Black Friday of 2013. My local Best Buy always opened earlier than other stores, and Best Buy was known to have the best deals. I was searching for a new laptop for school as I'd be starting college in the spring, and Best Buy seemed like the ideal store for that. I didn't need some super advanced computer, just a system that can help me do simple tasks. Now, this was when Black Friday was peak, when companies didn't gaslight customers into thinking they lowered prices like they do now. If you've gone shopping on Black Friday these past few years, you know what I'm talking about. There were about 30 plus people already camped out in front of the Best Buy to get their hands on the best deals. It was around 5 a.m. and everyone was eager for them to open any minute. The second they did, everyone stormed the building, getting their hands on basically everything in sight. I knew I had to be fast, so I hurried to the electronics section and grabbed the cheapest laptop and headed to the register. I buy it and leave the store back out into the parking lot into my car, just wanting to go home and back to sleep. Surprisingly, the parking lot was mostly empty and there weren't many people out as I thought. As I'm getting in my car, ready to drive home, I see something unexpected that completely caught me off guard. Out in the parking lot was a young boy, maybe around 9, approaching my car. He wore a bright, oversized jacket and appeared to be cautious about something. He goes up to my car and lightly taps on my window, motioning for me to roll it down. Now, I've seen too many horror movies to be stupid enough to do that, so I roll it down just a tad to be able to talk to him. Right off the bat, he seemed shaken up by something and asks me if I had any spare change for food. Now, I never carry cash on me, and when I do, it's spent very quickly. However, just in case, I checked the glove compartment where I would normally keep change and see I had a $50 bill. Though I wasn't trying to give a kid $50, so I politely said that I didn't have any, but that I'd be happy to buy him food. There was a long pause before he said that it was fine and that he'd ask someone else. It was then when I started to realize that he didn't appear to have anyone with him. No parents, no friends, no relatives, nothing. That's when I glanced past him and saw someone hiding behind one of the cars from a distance. I'm unsure if they saw I had spotted them, but I didn't want to take the chance that they did. After putting two and two together, I sped out of the parking lot just wanting to get home. I told the kid that I had to go and that I hope things work out for him. Call me cruel or whatever, I was not about to get robbed or whatever sick trap this was. Anyway, I drive home and finally get some rest until the next morning where I told my family about my encounter. I remember them scolding me about how I was incompetent and that I should have called the police right then. Now, I could understand calling the cops, but even if I did, chances are the kid and that other person would both be gone. It's also worth noting that police in this area never actually took anything too seriously unless it was a severe crime. About a month goes by and my family and I are at my godfather's house for Christmas when my mom saw a chilling article from our town. There were reports of 2 children going missing in that area, one of them being the kid I had seen. Turns out, he had been missing for over a year and police had released his photo. Remember when I said police in my city weren't on top of their game? Yeah, well, this is one prime example of that. I had reported my sighting of him to police, but nothing ever became of it. Till this day, I strongly believe that someone had been using him as a decoy to convince people to do shady stuff, and I almost fell for it. It's been over 10 years now, and he was found deceased by a canal just a few months from my encounter. The news said it was the result of natural causes, but I've always wondered about that. My family and I live in Georgia and would sometimes visit our extended family in Virginia for the holidays. This happened in 2009, and we had been invited to stay with them for Thanksgiving for a few days. We rarely saw each other, so we wanted to spend as much time with them as possible. They lived in a rural part of Albemarle County, and their house was massive. We had other family flying in from around the US and planned on having enough food for 40+ people. It's a very long and boring ride up there, but we get there before noon and have time to mess around and talk with them. And we, kids, start to play around in the downstairs basement playing the Wii and whatnot until it was time for dinner. Us and our cousins are down there for a good while when we get bored and decided to play hide and seek. We were always glued to the video games, so we decided to switch it up a bit and play something productive, if that made sense. We each play bubblegum to decide who would seek first. It was later decided that it would be me, and so I gave everyone a minute to go hide while I counted down. Mind you, this basement was huge, so there were so many places to hide. However, the only rule was that we could only hide in the basement and not the house itself. Long story short, I count down and begin tossing the place, trying to find them any way I could. Searching rooms, under tables, behind couches, and even in the dryer. As I make my way past one of the hallways down there, I notice a large blue tarp laying on stuff in the boiler room. I remember somewhat laughing and quietly tiptoe over to the blue tarp, expecting to see one of my cousins hiding underneath it. Without hesitation, I yanked the tarp off, but did not see any of my cousins. Instead, I saw a man, maybe in his mid-30s, staring right through my soul. I watch as he puts his finger to his lips, doing a hushing sound while giving me this wicked grin. I screamed so loud that all of my cousins came out of hiding and freaked out at the sight of him. It did not take long for my dad and uncle to come down to see what was wrong. When they saw this man, they did not hesitate to tackle him. The fight was over pretty fast, with both my dad and uncle delivering several blows to his face. My uncle was able to identify him as my aunt's ex-boyfriend who had somehow found his way into the house. God only knows what he was planning on doing or why he was here. According to my aunt, she hadn't seen him in years, which only made the situation even more unsettling. He was later arrested and charged with breaking and entering. There were rumors around the family about assault taking place, but that hasn't been confirmed nor denied. I was still a kid back then, and looking back at it now, it's much more terrifying to think what he could have possibly been doing. Walmart and Target not only attract the weirdest people, but also dangerous people. This isn't the type of story to have you on the edge of your seat type of story, but man, is this something we never expected. It was Black Friday of 2013, which meant my brothers and I were going video game shopping. Video games for consoles were peak during this time, so everyone and their grandma were eager to get their hands on the new games. This was especially true with Grand Theft Auto 5, a game that was taking over the world at the time, and we were definitely not going to risk not getting it. My mom gave us each $200, which was also our Christmas present, meaning we'd pretty much have to buy our own gifts. We were approaching that age where our parents knew we no longer believed in Santa, hence why they were doing this. We started with Target, which was pretty busy, even in the morning trying to look for the game. However, most of the aisles in the store were cleared, meaning that the game was likely gone. Disappointed, but also not surprised, we walk over to the gaming section and see that it had been ransacked as well. I remember my brother yelling a "God damn it" when we see a man we had never seen before approach us. He calmly asks what was wrong, and we had just told him we were disappointed that the game we wanted was sold out. To our surprise, he introduced himself as the assistant store manager and that he actually had 2 extra games in one of the back offices. We were extremely confused as, even though he claimed to work here, he wasn't wearing anything that would resemble a manager or even an employee. Apparently, the games were originally on hold, and I guess the person who wanted it never came to get them. He tells for us boys to go with him to the back so that he could get them for us. Mind you, we were both 14 at the time, so we didn't even question him or think twice about it. We follow him to the back of the store where he opens the door to a room with a desk and computer. He grabs a plastic bag off the desk and hands us each a copy of the game we've been after. Then he tells us to go pay up front, and we gladly do. At this point, we were both thrilled and thought we had lucked out by the manager. We bought the games and left the store with smiles on our faces, talking about how we were the luckiest people alive. Before calling our mom to come pick us up, my brother suggested we go over to another store to look at some more stuff. We go over to another store, but don't end up buying anything as we were low on money. With nothing to do, we then call our mom to come pick us up, and she arrives within a few minutes as she was already close by. We get home and are immediately eager to play our games. I let my brother go first, and I watch as he unwraps the plastic film of the case. However, what happened next was something that shocked us both. My brother was expecting to see a game disc, but instead saw a flattened plastic Ziploc bag folded in where the disc was supposed to be. He takes it out, and inside the bag was what appeared to be a yellowish substance in the form of powder. Out of curiosity, my brother opens the bag and instantly starts coughing hysterically. I scream for my mom as I try to sit him upright to get him to relax. This utterly terrified me because it wasn't the normal cough you'd hear. His were more severe, and he was wheezing as if he were gasping for air. My mom storms into the living room in a panic and tells me to call 911 while she proceeded to perform CPR. My mom is an RN, so I let her do what she needed to do. It didn't take long for an ambulance to arrive and get my brother moving. By the time they got here, my brother was pale as a ghost with major discoloration. Just to be safe, I opened my game, and sure enough, there was another small bag in it containing the same thing. I didn't even dream of touching it and just let the police deal with it. My brother was rushed to the hospital where he was treated for toxic fumes and would survive. It took a while for him to go back to normal though. For weeks after, he had been coughing here and there as well as having blurry vision until it eventually went away. As it turns out, that so-called manager at Target was no manager after all. He was a local druggie impersonating a store worker to try and get rid of whatever he gave us. He must have thought that giving it to unsuspecting teens would be the best way to go about it. How he managed to impersonate a store employee without getting caught is anyone's guess. Police say that he couldn't have been there long as someone would have noticed. My brother is doing fine now and has just graduated college with his bachelor's in pre-med. As for the employee imposter, I have no idea what happened to him. I don't know if he was ever caught, locked in prison, died in a car crash, or is still out there. I'd like to think that he was thrown in jail, but something tells me otherwise. Back before my girlfriend Eliza and I started dating, we hung out all the time as good friends. We both obviously didn't have the same feelings for each other back then, but we did enjoy each other's company. This happened around the time where we both started to feel that there was something more to our relationship than friends. It was the winter of 2018, and we both had planned a skiing trip up to Vermont. Vermont had really good slopes, and with us having some experience with skiing, we were up for a challenge. We rented out a hotel room close to the ski resort as it seemed the most convenient for us. We took the gondola ride up to the mountain and had a great time skiing. As much as people don't like the idea of skiing, it was actually really fun if you practiced. That being said, we spent most of the day skiing and having a blast. Apart from the ski resort was a hiking trail and lodge for people who either didn't want to go skiing or if people wanted a break. It was nearing the end of the day, and Eliza suggested we take the hour-long hike around the mountain. Now, this hike was sort of a do-it-at-your-own-risk type of hike, meaning there was no trail guide or anything like that. The only thing we had as a guide was some painted markings around the trees to know where we were going. Even though it was a beginner's hike, it was still really easy to get lost in these woods. Eliza and I started our hike, just enjoying ourselves and whatnot. We're about 20 minutes into the hike when she has the urge to pee. It wouldn't be for another 50 minutes or so before we reached an actual bathroom, so she said she'd go into the woods and that she'd be back. I watch as she walks off the path and into the woods before disappearing behind a large tree. She went pretty far off, but I thought she just needed extra privacy, especially us being on our first trip together. However, as the minutes passed, she never returned to the path and I didn't even see her. I then thought to myself, what could she possibly be doing that's taking her so long? I thought. At this point, she had been gone for a good 10 minutes, and that's when I started to get worried. I step out of the trail and follow her footpath to try and find out where she went. Thank God I see her standing by a small clearing with her phone out. Then she motions for me to go to her. When I walk up to her, I see what she stopped for. In this small clearing was what I could only describe as huge bones. Maybe bear, maybe horse, I don't know. The majority of the bones were organized in circles, and even some formed into a teepee of sorts. There were also some smaller bones hanging from trees by some string. I asked Eliza what the hell this was. As expected, she didn't know, and we began to wonder if the resort knew about this. There was also what appeared to be a half-formed humanoid snowman-type sculpture next to the bones, indicating that someone had recently been here. All of a sudden, we both began to get a strange feeling that we were being watched, and we got out of there ASAP. We were not going to stick around to find out who or what made this, as it didn't strike me as anything good. We told the resort, but we never heard anything back from them after our trip. In the off chance that the bones were fake, it could have very well been someone easily pranking us. However, I'm not sure if I believe that. We're now a couple and plan on getting married soon, but we'll always have this story to share. In 2011, I moved to a college in Colorado during the winter for my master's degree in psychology. The school had a really good program, and a master's was mandatory for my career. My financial aid covered housing, and I had a single dorm that sat right on the edge of campus. Most of my classmates were nice, and my professors were some of the best, especially at an Ivy League school. Mid-semester, I had my midterm coming up and had a lot of homework to do. Living in a one-bedroom dorm with basically no friends, I decided that I'd take a walk to the woods beside the dorms. It was nicknamed Jordan's Forest. I still don't know who Jordan was or why it was called that, but a lot of students would commonly go there to smoke and stuff. I was never into that and hoped for a moment to myself with nobody around. So anyway, there I am, heading down the trail, keeping to myself when I decide to sit down by the old fountain hidden deeper into the woods. Apparently the fountain used to belong to a fraternity at one point. However, I guess they haven't used it in a while, as the fountain was hanging by a thread and appeared to have been unkept for years. As I'm sitting by the fountain, just reflecting on life, I hear footsteps in the snow from behind me. I turn around, and standing there is a man with a jacket and hat on. He gives me a friendly gesture as a way to say hello, and me, being the shy person I was, gave him a quick smile. He then comes up to me and introduced himself as Doug. As I said, I wanted to be alone with myself at the moment, and having someone else nearby really killed the mood. However, I didn't want to come off as rude, so I tell him my name and went on my phone to act busy. Right away, something seemed off about him, and he didn't exactly look like a college student. If I had to guess, I'd say he had to be in his late 30s or maybe early 40s. He proceeds to sit down beside me while keeping a short distance before saying, "So, is this your first time on campus?" he said. "Yeah, I just started my master's," I said. He looks at me with a smirk and says, "Oh, I see. Well, you'll love it here. You seem so young and bright. You do fine." I thank him for the compliment and tend to my phone to try and talk to him the least I could, hoping he'd get the hint. After some minor small talk, I finally say it's getting colder and that I was gonna head back to my dorm. As I'm walking away, I could just feel his eyes glued to the back of me, and the minute I turned around, I saw him staring at me. It wasn't until then where I started walking a little faster, hoping he wasn't following me. When I created a safe enough distance, I checked behind me once more and didn't see him. I breathed a sigh of relief and entered my dorm to continue studying for my midterm. However, as I was studying, I couldn't stop thinking about that man. I'm not one to be judgmental or anything, but he didn't strike me as a student at all. I'm not saying older people don't go back to school, they do, but there was indeed something off about him. I studied for another 2 hours or so when I decide to call it there and settle in for the night. I freshen up in the shower when my friend from my home state calls me via FaceTime. This is someone who I haven't spoken to in weeks, so I step out of the shower with my robe on and gladly answer it. She was mentioning about how she got a new job and how she just moved in with her boyfriend. Basically a bunch of life stuff. We're talking on the phone for a good hour or so when I decide to lean my phone against some books so the camera is on me. She continues her story and such when she suddenly stops mid-sentence and looks at me strangely. When I ask her what was wrong, she says that there's someone looking into my room from the window. My blood ran cold and I turn around and see what I can only describe as Doug peeking through my window. The second he spots me, he ducks down out of view. I begin telling my friend that I had met this man earlier and didn't know who he was. She recommended I call campus security, and I did just that. I even had my friend still on the phone with me as a way to make me feel like I was with someone. As I'm on the phone with security, I hear my doorknob start to move and someone trying to open it. Thankfully it was locked, but I'll never forget the voice Doug made while trying to open my door. It was this low and gravelly voice, telling me that he could easily break this door down with one kick. I'll admit, I started to shed tears right then, just wanting security to get here. When they did, they had arrived with the police, who then placed him under arrest. Turns out Doug had actually been a student here once and has since been homeless for over 5 years. His girlfriend died while they were both in school and had chose to live near campus as a way to cope, as this was the last memory of her and him together. I will say I did feel some sympathy for him, but I couldn't allow him to continue what he did to me to others. Up until recently, he was released from prison for good behavior, and the university has since banned him from being on campus grounds. I graduated with honors a year later, and I haven't returned to campus since.
Iowa is one of those places that can feel a bit cut off from society. My town was literally a school, a grocery store, a gas station, a post office, and a barn that was converted into a roller rink with a population of about 900. For the sake of the story, I'll refer to the town as Outpost 19. I was 17 when this happened, in my senior year of high school. My best friend, Jerry, had moved to Cedar Rapids because his parents had gotten divorced and his mom received full custody, at least until he was 18. Jerry had been dating a girl who lived at Outpost 19, so every weekend he would make the hour drive back into town to see his dad, hang out with his girlfriend, and if he had time, we would meet up and have a beer. This was the routine for about a year. I remember when this story happened, graduation was approaching, but the school year wasn't quite over yet. One weekend, Jerry came back into town like usual, but his girlfriend was on vacation with her family, so we decided to go cruising around. We considered making a stop at the roller rink, but quickly dismissed that idea. Since it was a Saturday night, a bunch of kids would be there, so we literally end up just driving around and throwing empty beer bottles at road signs. Around this time period, I picked up some part-time work at the local grocery store, restocking inventory on weeknights. Point being, I would listen to crime podcasts and creepypastas during my shifts. There was one story called The Showers that really stuck with me. The story was about a guy who went on a witch hunt through the back roads of Nebraska, searching for a mysterious building that his teacher told him about, only to discover something truly horrifying lurking within the structure. Nebraska and Iowa share very similar landscapes, and the way the author described the setting reminded me a lot of the prairies and farmlands surrounding Outpost 19. Since Jerry and I were bored enough to be driving around aimlessly, I suggested that we try to go somewhere that looked abandoned and check it out, withholding that I had gotten the idea from a creepypasta I heard on YouTube. Truth be told, we had never really done too much exploring outside of our hometown. Sure, we had gone fishing in the nearby rivers, and as kids, would play manhunt in the cornfields, but we never went snooping around someone else's property. I guess we were bored enough to take the risks that night. So we drove around a bit, until we came upon a dirt road that was situated between two cornfields, which led up to what looked like a two-story barn. There were absolutely no lights on anywhere, just the moon and the headlights on Jerry's truck, which I suggested he shut off before turning onto the dirt road. We moved slowly and carefully along the dirt road until we reached the barn house at the end. I was geeking out on the inside, because this was literally just like the story. But we had no idea if this barn house was actually abandoned. We could have been shot at by some angry farmer for trespassing. But there wasn't a soul in sight. So Jerry turned his truck around to face the dirt road and killed the engine. If we had to make a quick getaway, at least the truck would be facing in the right direction. We then got out of the truck and made our way toward the barn. As I said before, there were no lights anywhere on this property. But in the moonlight, I saw one of those galvanized windmills, a couple of water troughs that were dumped over, and a silo next to the barn. This place looked like it was a cattle ranch. But where were all the animals? I guess there was only one way to find out. There were a few wooden doors on the side of the barn that we tried to open, but each one was locked. So we made our way to the giant double doors that were in the very front of the building, and to our surprise, they swung right open. We immediately noticed that there was a faint glow coming from several areas within the building. I quickly realized that it was candlelight. Jerry had brought along a flashlight, but said that he wouldn't turn it on unless he absolutely needed to, as to not give away our position to the aforementioned angry farmer with a gun. But even with the candlelight, it was impossible to see inside this building. That's when I got this sinking feeling, telling me that we should leave right away. Jerry turned on his flashlight and shined it into the building. There were several candelabras placed on tables and railings throughout the foyer. The layout was almost like a wedding venue. We didn't see anyone, but someone had to have lit all these candles. We then noticed what looked like an altar in the center of the room. There was an unspoken thing between Jerry and I. We were going to have to see what was on this altar. And as we got closer, I saw a large knife between two candlesticks that had been stabbed into something. We had to get a bit closer to see what it was, and we soon discovered what looked like a dead lamb. Jerry, I think it's time to leave. Now. We booked it back to the truck, got in, and started it up. I took one last look behind us before we sped off back down the dirt road. I shit you not, I could see several figures standing outside the barn, and we even heard something hitting the tailgate of the truck before we peeled out of there. We had to GPS our way back to Outpost 19. I would say it took about 30 minutes to get back there. We didn't tell anyone about what happened because we didn't want to get into trouble for trespassing. There was a small dent on Jerry's tailgate. We assumed that one of the people I saw outside the barn must have thrown a rock or something. I lived at Outpost 19 for another year before I moved to Des Moines to work in construction. And a year after that, my parents retired and moved away as well, so there's no reason for me to return to that town ever again. I've tried to research any dairy or cattle farms located outside Outpost 19, but I can't be sure if any of them were the place that we were at that night. It was quite dark, and the place could look completely different during the day. I've heard rumors that many satanic cults have compounds in secluded areas of Iowa. This is only a guess, but I think we stumbled into one of these compounds that night and interrupted some kind of ritual that was taking place in that barn. During my early 20s, I worked as a meter reader in Iowa City. A meter reader is someone who records how much electricity, gas, or water you've used each month. If your meters are on the inside and you want an accurate bill, a meter reader must enter your home, whether you're there or not, to let them in. As a side note, we only enter houses if consent was given when the customer first signs up for the service. Customers also provide us with keys if necessary. Entering a home when the owner is not present is something that I've never gotten used to. No matter how loudly I knock, I can never shake this uneasy feeling that I wasn't welcome there. The inside of a home is the ultimate private space. A home's exterior is just the image of ourselves that we project to the rest of the world. However, the further you venture inside, the closer you come to truly seeing what kind of person lives there. And if you want the raw, unfiltered truth, head for the basement. I hate basements. I've seen walls that look like giant static-filled TV screens, until I realized it was roaches scurrying across a white background, cobwebs so thick it looked like a cotton candy machine had exploded. I've seen rats, snakes, feces, weapons, neglected children, abused pets, homeless squatters, massive hordes, bizarre sexual items, a makeshift meth lab, and even a coffin. There are rational explanations for all these things. Well, maybe not the coffin. But there was one basement where I found something that was beyond the grasp of logic, and that's what made it so terrifying. It was at an old apartment house. From the outside, it looked like any other home on the block. I entered the back door and found myself at the top of a staircase. I ran my hand along the wall until I grazed a light switch. I flipped the switch, but no lights turned on. I wasn't carrying a flashlight. A typical route for me involved 5 or 6 hours of walking, so I tried to carry as little as possible. Oftentimes, I would use a light from my handheld screen, but it only illuminated whatever was about a foot in front of it. It was essentially the world's worst lantern. I aimed it and made my way down into the darkness. Once at the bottom, I blindly shuffled across the room, one baby step at a time. With arms outstretched and head down, I eventually made it to the far side of the basement. I shined the dim light from my handheld along the wall and discovered 2 doors. Each door led into its own small room. I chose the one on the right and found the meters in the far corner. As I entered the data, I began hearing noises coming from the other room. Something was moving around in there, and there was some whimpering that grew louder the longer I listened. I eventually realized it was a dog. It sounded weak and distressed. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. At this point, the dog was scratching on the other side. I felt helpless. I reported it when I got back to the office, but I couldn't shake the thought of that dog being trapped down there in that basement. It stuck with me over the next month until it was time to return. So there I was, in the same place a month later, back inside that dark basement. At least this time, I knew where the meters were located. I shuffled back to those small rooms and entered the one on the right, while carefully listening for any sounds that may come from the other room. This time I heard nothing. I read the meters and started making my way back, but I couldn't shake that memory of the dog. Was it still trapped inside that room? Curiosity got the best of me. I stood outside the door for a few moments, just listening, but heard nothing. That's when I made a huge mistake. I tried to open the door. I had barely jiggled the doorknob when I first heard it. It was a blood-curdling scream, unlike anything I have ever heard. It was a sound that I didn't think a human was capable of producing. Short, piercing, high-pitched shrieks, followed by abruptly low, drawn-out, guttural moans. That ultimately morphed into something that I can only describe as crying, but much louder. It was all over the place, some sort of psychotic, free-form jazz. I stumbled backwards, nearly losing my balance. I shouted something like, "Hello? Who's in there?" But there was no response, just more screaming. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Still no response. The screaming continued. There was no doubt that whoever was in there heard me. Apparently they didn't want my help at all. They just wanted me gone. So I fumbled my way through the dark room, toward the exit. When I got to the top of the stairs, I just stood there, listening. I was trying to wrap my mind around what I was hearing. I waited for the screaming to stop, but it never did. When I finally left, it was still as loud and demented as it was when it began. I felt relieved, but that quickly vanished when I realized I had to do it all over again next month. I reported what I heard, but nothing came of it. As my return drew near, a sense of dread began to grow inside of me. What kind of lunatic sits alone in total darkness and silence? My mind created endless explanations of what kind of hell was beyond that door. By the time I returned, I had built them up in my mind so much that anyone other than Lucifer himself would have been a letdown. But there was no sign of anyone, or even over the next several months. I had nearly given up on solving the mystery when a stroke of luck pulled me back in. One night, I went to a concert with my friend, Laura. After the show, I gave her a ride home. She moved somewhat recently, so she had to give me directions. I didn't really pay much attention to where she was leading me, until she pointed to a house a ways up the street. I couldn't believe it. She had moved into the house with a mysterious room in the basement. This is going to sound weird, but have you ever noticed anything odd about the basement at this? Before I could even finish my sentence, she blurted out, "Some crazy guy lives down there." Finally, I had confirmation. She went on to tell me that even though her apartment was located in the attic, she often heard him yelling late at night. But that wasn't all. She had actually met him. One day, while walking to her car, she saw him standing in the lawn. He was perfectly still, with no expression on his face. He was directly in her path, so she cautiously made her way around him. He was staring at her, so she offered a friendly "hello" as she passed. He had no reaction, except for one unsettling exception. He stuck his tongue out at her, then quickly sucked it back into his mouth, then resumed acting like a statue. Thoroughly creeped out, she got in her car and drove away. It was about 2 or 3 months later when I finally met him. I entered the back door, like I had so many months before, but this time something was different. There was a light on down in the basement. I peered down the staircase. At the bottom, a ragged-looking dog was staring back at me. It was the same dog I had heard during my first visit. Then, I noticed something else. Behind the dog, I could see a pair of bare feet. The ceiling blocked my view of whoever was standing there, but it didn't matter. I knew it was him. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I know this probably doesn't make any sense, but at this point, my desire to finally get some answers outweighed my fear. I called out, "Hello? It's the meter reader." I then began to make my descent. As I made my way down, more of him was revealed to me, slowly. He looked to be middle-aged. His head was shaved. His eyes were wild. He was wearing pants, but no shirt. What I remember the most about him was how lean and sinewy his body looked. It looked like the body of a person that was never at rest. I explained to him who I was and what I was doing there. And to my surprise, not only did he talk to me, but he acted and sounded somewhat normal. The volume and pitch of his voice was odd, but he said the same sorts of things that people typically say to meter readers. I even started to doubt whether or not he was the same man I had heard screaming. But his behavior slowly removed any doubts. As I read the meters, he rapidly paced back and forth. He was constantly wringing his hands together and sporadically cocking his head from one side to the other. The longer he talked, the more agitated he became. He began grimacing, and little verbal tics started popping up in his speech. Every so often he would blurt out, "Aw," in the middle of a sentence. He was trying his best to suppress these sounds, but he was losing that battle. I started to make my way toward the exit, and he followed. His verbal outbursts grew louder and more frequent. I was becoming petrified. When I got to the stairs, our conversation came to an end, and I said goodbye. As I turned to head up the staircase, he could no longer hold back, and he began screaming. The very same unforgettable screams I had heard coming from the locked room. I ran up the stairs as fast as my legs would carry me, flung open the door, and rushed back into the daylight. A couple of months later, I had some friends over my place, including Laura. I was excited to tell her about my encounter, but as I was relaying what happened, I could tell that something else was on her mind. When I finished telling my story, she told me about something that she had seen a couple of weeks earlier. One day, she noticed flashing lights outside her window. When she looked outside, she saw a couple of police officers placing the man from the basement in the back seat of a squad car. She later found out from another tenant that he had attacked someone with a knife. That was the last we ever saw of him. I don't know what became of the man in the basement. I'd like to think that he got the help he needed, but maybe that's just because I'd rather not think about the alternative.
There's always a reason to be afraid.
The air currently had that brittleness to it, the kind that you really only get when fall is past its peak and winter's waiting around the corner. Clay and I had been on the ranch since sunup, checking troughs, tightening wire, hauling scrap out of the pastures before snow turned it all into hidden hazards. That was the job this time of year though, tidy the edges, put things in order, make sure nothing came back to bite you when the ground froze and the herds got mean. The cattle weren't where they should have been. They drifted to the south side, bunched together, leaving the northern pasture strangely empty. Animals seem to know things before men do, and I took their absence as some kind of sign, though I didn't say it out loud. Clay seemed to notice it too. He made a joke about it, something about lazy cows, but I caught the way his eyes kept flicking to the end of the property line, where the cottonwoods stood gray against the sky. We'd been told to leave that edge alone. Old man Mathers, who owned the spread, was really clear about it. Fix what needs fixing, but don't go looking for work where it don't call to you, he'd said, with that kind of weight too. Neither of us asked any questions. You don't when the man's signing your checks and prefers a quiet room. But work has this weird way of pulling you towards trouble sometimes. A section of the fence was down, wire sagging into the dirt, posts leaning over from the rod. We could have left it for another day, sure, but the light was thinning, and both of us knew an open fence line was a risk that we couldn't really afford. Coyotes, strays, anything could slip through. So we rode out on the north boundary, tools in the bed of the truck, trailing dust behind us. I remember the moment thinking something felt weird, like crossing over into sacred ground, but I told myself it's just the season, the cold, the shadows of dawn. Still, that feeling in my gut had the truth nailed down already, before I even knew it. By the time we reached the far edge, the sky was beginning its slow collapse into dusk. Clay cut the engine, and for a few seconds, nobody moved. I took stock the way I always do, listening, measuring, noting what stood out. Out here, the silence was loud. No birds, no crickets, no cough of cattle, just wind in the brush. We stepped down and walked the fence line, boots crunching over the frost-hardened weeds. The wire had snapped clean at one post, leaving a gap wide enough for almost anything short of a bull to wander through. Clay muttered about how long it would take to set new posts, and I was only half listening. My attention was locked on a smell. It wasn't manure or brush fire or anything you'd normally associate with ranch work. This was coppery, rank, decay sitting heavy in the back of my throat. I followed it. 20 feet in the grass, I found the cow. She wasn't one of ours though. The brand mark was unfamiliar, burned deep into her hide, half hidden beneath the tearing. She'd been mauled. Ribs were split apart, belly torn open, tongue lolling off gray and stiff. Coyotes had done some of the work, but not all of it. I crouched close enough to see the edges of the wounds, jagged but not clean. I made a note about the drag marks heading further off into the brush as well. Jesus Christ, Clay said behind me, pulling his bandana up over his nose. That ain't ours, is it? No, I answered back. The brand's from over by Gunnison's place, I think, a couple of miles out. We stood over her for a minute, neither of us really eager to admit what it meant. A dead cow wasn't unusual, but one mauled this close to the line with no signs of a predator lingering set me on edge. Animals don't take cattle down this way unless they're desperate or unless something else is in play. Free-range cows are meaner than hell, and they don't really make for an easy kill. Clay said we should just patch up the fence and go, leave the carcass for the scavengers. I almost agreed with him, and then I saw the boot. It jutted out of the brush like earth had spit it up. Leather cracked and I froze. Clay followed my stare. We didn't speak. You don't really when you see something like that. I grabbed hold and pulled up. The ground gave up its secret slowly. First, the leg, stiff and heavy, then the rest. A body, half buried in leaf litter, chewed in places the way the cow had been. The face was gone, stripped down to bone, hands curled tight, frozen in this clawing gesture. He'd fought to the very end. Clay cursed again and turned away like he might vomit. I continued to look. My habit is to take in the details even when I don't want to. The clothes were ranch clothes, denim, wool, boots worn thin from saddle work. He wasn't carrying a wallet, or if he had, the scavengers had taken it. No obvious marks of identification, just another working man, cut down and left where nobody could find him. A sharp sound then broke the moment. I spun, a hand on the knife of my belt. Out from the tree line, a horse stood there, watching us. She was in rough shape, coat dulled, ribs showing, mane tangled up into knots. Still saddled, stirrups hanging loose. The reins were trailing in the dirt. She looked ready to bolt, but too tired to commit to it. Her eyes were rolling white in that low light. Clay breathed out shaky, collecting himself. That's his, right? It has to be, he said, nodding at the corpse, then at the horse. His hand came to rest on the revolver on his waist. I mean, it made sense. A cow strays through a broken fence, a hired hand saddles up to fetch it. Somewhere along the line, everything goes wrong. The cow ends up gutted, the rider ends up dead, the horse wanders until hunger and exhaustion drag her back. That was the story the scene wanted us to believe, and boy, was it believable. We circled slowly, careful to not spook the animal. I kept my hands low, talking softly. Eventually, she let me grab the reins. The leather was cracked and stiff. I checked the saddle for marks, a brand, stamp, tag, but nothing. Whoever owned her had made no mark. Honestly, we probably should have left it at that. Should have taken the horse and the corpse back to Mathers, called it in. Let the sheriff sort out all these details, but something continued to gnaw at me. I personally wanted confirmation, needed it even. So I told Clay that we had to go back to the body. He didn't really seem to like the idea, but he followed me. We stood over the dead man again, both of us swallowing against the stench, the buzzing flies that clung to him even in the cold. I crouched down and examined the wounds more closely. The teeth marks were obvious, but they weren't the only marks. I pushed aside the torn jacket, holes, small, round, and ragged at the edges. Not made by claws or tusks, but definitely bullet holes. Clear as day. They ran through the chest, peppered up with the ribs. I counted 3. Then I looked at his skull, or what was left of it. The top was gone, shattered clean through. I didn't really need to be a coroner to recognize the truth. Yeah, this wasn't animals, I said. Clay blinked at me, then looked closer for himself. His face drained white. Jesus, is that a bullet hole in his head? He was shot, then left out here. Coyotes just cleaned up what was left, I surmised. We found ourselves standing there in silence once more, the weight of it all choking any more discussion. The questions started stacking up in my head. Who was he? Why would somebody kill him out here, in the scrub at the edge of Mathers land? Why leave the horse saddled, wandering around? Clay was the first to break the silence. "We need to go," he said, and he actually sounded kind of scared. I agreed. This wasn't just a dead hand and a stray cow anymore. This was straight up murder, and murder has a way of spreading, if you know what I mean. We hauled the horse along, neither of us talking now. The fence remained broken, wires sagging, tools untouched from where we dropped them off. The work didn't really matter anymore. What matters was getting back before somebody saw us out here and maybe shot us too. The wind picked up behind us as we walked, carrying with it the rustle of brush, the shifting of shadows. I kept my eyes moving, checking the tree line, the ground, the space behind us. Once you find a body riddled with bullets, you can't help but wonder if the shooter's still nearby, watching his work, waiting to see if somebody can find it. By the time we reached the truck, my nerves were shot. Clay got the horse loaded, as we just happened to have space in the horse trailer, while I continued to scan the horizon. The land around us was quiet and still. We drove back without really speaking, and finally, the ranch house lights came into view, warm and steady, but they didn't feel like safety, not with the knowledge that we now carried. We called it in as soon as we made it back to the house. Mathers didn't ask questions, just dialed the sheriff with that flat tone of his. Clay and I sat on the porch, watching the horse pace circles around the hitching post, feeling restless. Her eyes seemed to roll back every time the wind shifted. She didn't want to be here any more than we did. The deputies arrived just before sundown. They wanted us to lead them back out there, walk them straight to the body, the cow, the fence. So we did. It felt different now, going back. The land had now turned mean in the dark. Every tree bent like it wanted to fall on us. The body was still there, exactly where we left it, but something about him seemed smaller now, almost like he'd sunk deeper into the earth, half swallowed in just a handful of hours. The deputies said very little. They took photos, collected casings, though I never saw them bag anything. One deputy had checked the horse back at the house, running his hands down her legs, checking the teeth. "She's been out here a lot longer than a day," he muttered. "Closer to a week, I'd say." That didn't sit right. A week alone, saddled in trailing reins, and nobody had noticed her until now? We thought we saw everything out there. We gave our statements and left nothing out. Still, when I looked in their faces, I could tell they were already burying it in paperwork. "Some kind of accidental shooting," one said later. "Even though I don't know how you explain to put 3 rounds in a man's chest and then 1 through his skull by accident. Probably some drunks pot shooting in the brush, and this unlucky fellow was standing there, taking a leak or something." The investigation stretched on through November. A few strangers came and went, state men, not locals. They brought clipboards, asked pretty much the same questions, circled around the horse like they held some kind of key. At one point, they shaved her mane down to the skin, looking for marks. Clay swore that he saw a scar under the hair, a brand that had been burned over to erase it. They wouldn't let us close enough to confirm, though. Then there was the matter of the boots. The coroner swore the tread pattern didn't match anything sold locally, not in the country, maybe not in the state. Imported, he said, military issue or foreign exchange. Some of the details were really weird to me, but what do I know? After I started keeping a notebook, dates, details, odd scraps in the investigators that they clearly ignored, like the .223 shell that we found near the fence post 3 days after they supposedly combed the area, or the way the dead cow's brand didn't line up with any registered inside county records. Close but off, almost like it had been imitated. Clay told me I should burn the notebook, forget it, but I continued to write. By December, the case was cold. The official word was a trespassing drifter, cause unknown. The horse went unclaimed and sold at auction. I still can't shake what I saw. A body shot to pieces, boots that didn't belong, a horse half starved, and a cow that shouldn't have been there at all. It was like some kind of bad airport novel. Occasionally, sometimes when I ride out to that far fence line, I swear the air still carries that same copper tang. The cattle won't even graze there. Clay won't drive past it. I keep my notes, but not holding my breath. The road narrowed to little more than a cracked ribbon laid across the countryside. The map had promised this scenic drive, best leaf color this side of the country. But it was more isolation than really anything else. Acres of oaks and maples pressed in closely, their leaves showing off in this fire red orange and gold, while the blacktop wound us deeper into nowhere. "You're obsessed," my boyfriend said, smirking at me from the driver's seat. "All this for a photo shoot. We could have stayed in town taking pictures in front of the coffee shop pumpkins or something." I shot him a look. "Pumpkins don't count. This is about color, about the change. You'll see, the light hits just right out here." He shook his head, amused, but I saw the corners of his mouth twitching like he was holding back something sweeter than sarcasm. That was him though, half teasing, half there just because he liked being around me. The windows were down, the air was cool enough to nip at my cheeks, carrying that sharp smell of wet leaves and faint musk of river water. I snapped a few pictures out the passenger window while he drove, barns fading behind us, power lines disappearing. When the road dropped us at this river crossing, I knew this was the spot. An old bridge, paint peeled to rust, spanning the water. The current below us was running hard, white caps breaking against the boulders midstream. I leaned forward in my seat. "Stop here." He eased the car into the shoulder. We got out and I felt the air grow colder near the water. The sun was dipping behind a cloud cover, draining the warmth. "Perfect," I said, lifting my phone. I framed the shot, trees reflecting the racing water, sky darkening, branches stretching out like veins. "Hold on, I'll get closer." He vaulted the guardrail before I could protest, his shoes scraping up against the rocks as he picked his way down the bank. "Careful," I called out. He grinned back up at me, cocky as always. "Relax, babe, I'm fine." I lowered the phone, heart ticking a little faster. "Seriously, it's slick down there. Just stay where you are." He waved me off, stepping onto this mossy rock that was jutting into the water. He was aiming for an angle shot, a dramatic one, the one that would blow all my pictures out of the water. He crouched, phone in hand, adjusting. Then came a sound of a sharp crack of wood giving way. His foot slid, his arms pinwheeled, and before I could scream, he was gone, splashed hard into the river. I screamed out for him. He bobbed up, coughing, arms flailing as the current grabbed him like a toy. He tried to fight, tried to angle back toward the bank, but the water was going really fast. I sprinted over to the guardrail, clutching the cold steel, eyes locked on his head as it spun downstream. I yelled out, telling him to hold on. But he was already being pulled away, dragged under the bridge, vanishing around the bend. I vaulted the guardrail and slid down the bank, knees buckling on that wet slope. Dead leaves and roots tore underneath my hands. The ground tilted toward the water so steeply, it felt like gravity had a personal grudge against me. "Babe!" I shouted, though the river was swallowing my words. The water was roaring loud down here, rushing over the rocks around the bends, carrying him further and further. I stumbled along the bank, crashing through the brush, following the brief flashes of his jacket between the trees before it disappeared. The trail, if you could call it that, was little more than a deer path, branches slapping at my arms, thorns catching in my jeans. My feet slipped on slick moss and wet soil, but I pushed harder, lungs tearing out in that cold air. Every second stretched with the thought of his head going under and not coming back up. Half a mile down, the river slowed into this wide bend, logs jammed together in the shallows, leaves spinning in the eddies. I stumbled out of the trees, scanning and praying. I saw movement at the water's edge. I lurched forward, thinking it was him, but it wasn't. The shape broke from the brush with a snort, squat and heavy, bristled hair slick with mud. It was a wild hog, big, maybe a couple 100 pounds, tusks curving like knives, eyes dark and mean. Another shape behind it, smaller but just as ugly. I froze, my brain still clawing to save him, stuttering to a stop in the sight though. The hog was pawing at the ground, shoulders rolling. It wasn't curious, it was pissed. Then I saw why. Off to the side, half hidden in the brush, lay the torn carcass of a deer. Its ribcage had been open like a bag of chips. The air stank of blood, thick and coppery, riding on the cold river wind. My stomach flipped. The hog's had a kill and it was standing on top of it. The big one squealed and my ears rang. Then it charged me. I turned and bolted, my feet barely even finding any traction in that mud. But the sound of it, hooves pounding, brush snapping, it was right behind me. I pumped my legs harder than they ever had before, lungs searing with fire. I cut left along the bank, branches clawing at my arms again. The hog crashed through it like they weren't even there, and its scream tore in the air closer and closer. I risked a glance back when I saw the flash of tusks, mud spraying off its legs. Adrenaline spiked hot then, and I screamed. The ground then sloped down into the water. I slid and my feet got tangled, knees cracking into rock. Pain quickly shot up my leg, but I scrambled forward, hands clawing through the mud and the weeds. The hog skidded behind me, spraying earth. I scrambled up this half-rotted log that angled over the water, my hands burning on the rough bark, splinters biting in deep. The hog then rammed the log from below, the impact rattling my bones. I nearly pitched forward into the current myself. It backed up, snorted, and came again, and the log shuddered underneath me. I clung hard though, knuckles white, whispering nonsense prayers to myself, trying not to scream again. Another impact. The log cracked, part of it splintering. My boot slipped, my chest smashed up against the bark. I kicked down blindly, my heel connecting with the snout. It squealed, stumbled back a foot, and that was something, I guess. I shoved myself higher onto that log though, scrambling to the far side. My jeans tore open on a branch. The hog bellowed and circled, mud flying, but I didn't wait for it to come again. I leapt off the log and into the shallow water. The shock of the cold knifed through me. I splashed forward, stumbling, falling to my knees, scrambling back up, anything to put distance between us. The hog gave chase, crashing into the water behind me. Its bulk slowed down, just enough for me to reach a cluster of rocks at midstream. I hauled myself up, scraping skin raw on jagged edges. The hog lurked in the shadows, glaring, huffing clouds of steam off into the cold air. It paced and splashed, but didn't climb the rocks. The smaller one had joined it now, squealing, teeth snapping at the air. They guarded their ground, it killed behind them. I stood there shivering, shoes heavy with river water, staring across the bend like I'd woken up in hell. Then a sound cut through the river's roar, coughing. I spun, eyes darting upstream. 50 yards away, tangled up in another mess of driftwood, was him, my boyfriend, half sprawled out on a log, choking up water, dragging himself toward the shallows. Relief tore through me. "I'm here!" I screamed to him. He lifted his head, dazed, confused, but eyes unfocused. I risked one last look at the hogs. They stood right where they were, watching, the big one grunting, ears twitching. Satisfied I was leaving, or maybe just too lazy to press any further. Either way, they didn't follow as I slipped off the rocks and staggered upstream. I half ran, half fell across mud and rock until I finally reached him. He was soaked, shaking, lips pale as paper. His breath was coming rattling out of him, but he was alive. I collapsed onto my knees beside him, grabbing his arm, pulling him up. "Don't you dare," I whispered, though I wasn't even sure what I meant. Don't die or don't scare me like that again, because honestly, he looked like a corpse. He coughed, spat out some water, and then managed to say, I told you you get your shot." It was a half joke, half delirium, but I clutched him and never wanted to let go. I hooked my arm underneath his and pulled, our feet sucking at the mud. He staggered upright, teeth chattering, his weight heavy against me. Every step felt burrowed, like the river could come back and claim him at any second. Behind us came another squeal, though, high and furious. I twisted and the hogs were in fact following. First the smaller one, weaving through the brush, then the bigger. They weren't going to let us slip away so easy, I guess. "Move!" I hissed to him, yanking him forward. We stumbled along the bank, crashing through brittle weeds and thorny undergrowth. My lungs were screaming for air, but fear shoved me a little faster. The hogs continued to tear after us. I could almost feel them at my back, the ground trembling even. One wrong step, one stumble, and they'd be on top of us. The slope ahead led up to the road. I dragged him, half hauling, half shoving, until we clawed over the lip and onto the asphalt again. The car waited 20 yards up, silver hood catching what little light remained. "Go! Go!" My voice cracked. We limped, slipped, and shoved ourselves forward. Behind us, the hog scrambled up the bank, squealing, eyes glinting with rage. The bigger one hit the pavement like a tank. It charged, closing in the distance fast. I fumbled my keys out from my pocket. The car beeped as I slammed the unlock button. I ripped the door open, shoved him inside, and then dove across the seat as that hog continued to thunder closer. That beast rammed the bumper with a bone-shaking crash. The whole car jolted, glass rattling in its frame. I screamed and jammed the locks. The hog then backed up, snorted, and slammed into the side panel, denting the metal with its skull. The smaller one just squealed and circled. Start it! Start it! He croaked beside me, but my hands were shaking. It took 2 tries before the engine finally roared to life. I threw it into gear and floored the pedal. The tires screamed, gravel sprang as we lurched forward. The hogs continued to give chase for 20 yards before dropping back. The bigger one planted itself in the middle of the road, watching us vanish away. I didn't slow down until the bridge was at least a mile behind us. He sat slumped in the passenger seat, shivering, eyes hollow. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles were aching. Outside the window, the October woods blurred into streaks of fire-colored leaves. They didn't look beautiful anymore. They almost looked like warning signs that we've been too dumb to read. There isn't a heroic follow-up to the story either. We left with our tails tucked firmly behind us, didn't call the police, game wardens, or even go to the hospital. What could we say or do? That a wild animal scared the shit out of us? There's not really any kind of help for that.